The Roanoke City Council informal session for May the 2nd, 2022 is hereby called to order, and I will ask our clerk, Ms. Susan McCord, to please call the roll.
Ms. Moon Reynolds.
Here.
Ms. Price.
Here.
Ms. Sanchez Jones.
Here.
Vice Mayor White Boyd.
Here.
Mr. Bestfitch.
Here.
Mr. Cobb.
Here.
And Mayor Lee.
Here, and the quorum is present. Welcome and good morning to everybody. Council meetings will be televised live and replayed on RVTV Channel 3 on Thursdays at 7 o'clock p.m. and Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. and video stream through Facebook Live at facebook.com/Roanoke VA. Council meetings are offered with closed captioning for the deaf or hard of hearing. All right. Now, items for action this morning. A communication from the mayor's office requesting that council convene in a closed meeting to discuss vacancies on certain authorities, boards, commissions, and committees appointed by council pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 Code of Virginia as amended. And a list of current vacancies is included with your package. So I need a motion.
So moved. Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Moon Reynolds.
Aye.
Ms. Price.
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez Jones.
Aye.
Vice Mayor White Boyd.
Aye.
Mr. Bestfitch.
Aye.
Mr. Cobb.
Aye.
Mayor Lee.
Aye. And that motion passes. Thank you. A communication from my office again, requesting that council convene in a closed meeting to discuss the appointments of 2 trustees to serve on the Roanoke City School Board for 3-year terms each, commencing July 1st, 2022, and ending June 30th, 2025, pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 Code of Virginia as amended. I need a motion.
So moved. Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Moon Reynolds.
Aye.
Ms. Price.
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez Jones.
Aye.
Vice Mayor White Boyd.
Aye.
Mr. Bestfitch.
Aye.
Mr. Cobb.
Aye.
Mayor Lee.
Aye. And the motion passes. Thank you. All right, there are items on the 2 p.m. council docket requiring discussion or clarification. Are there any items? And additions, deletions to the 2 p.m. agenda? And there are no topics for myself or members of council. All right, we're now down to briefings. And I'm going to please call on the city manager to introduce the briefings to us. Thank you, Ms. Cowell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And this. Good morning. This is our annual budget study, and essentially what budget study, for those of you that have been through this through other budgets and those of you that are new to it, this is the time really for you as a council, as a body, to discuss further the proposed budget, to react to whatever has been proposed, to ask any questions that remain, and also to provide any alternative direction associated with the budget. Of course, since we presented the budget, we have met with each of you either individually or as 2 at a time to answer many of those questions, provide additional information, and so on. And of course, you had last week the public hearing where you were able to hear from members of the community regarding the proposed budget. So all of those kind of get us to this moment to be able to, again, to answer any final questions that you might have as we move forward, because Next week, May 9th, is when the budget is presented to you for adoption, or when action is required on the budget itself. So, again, this time is for you, but I do need to be able to provide a bit of an overview and then kind of open it up for questions. So if you'll kind of bear with me as we work our way through this. The agenda for this particular study is to give you a fairly quick overview of the FY23 proposed budget, which was, again, submitted 2 weeks ago as a balanced budget. Also, there were a number of items that had come up either in those one-on-one discussions with you or that came up at the public hearing that we'll touch on briefly, and then again open up to any other remaining questions that you all might have as well. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about kind of next steps in this process as we go toward adoption. Just as a reminder, of course, we budget for a reason, and that reason is to advance on the vision established for the community that you see here, and to fund the 7 priority areas within the city itself. And just as a reminder, the top priorities focus on education and community safety, and essentially more than half of the money that goes into our expenditures goes into those 2 areas. But there are 7 total priorities that the budget seeks to identify funding for as we advance on those in accordance with the direction that you all have provided through our strategic retreats and other direction that you provide through policy and through standards in place as well. Just a quick reminder, the proposed budget, again, is balanced at $324,789,000. This represents a 5.6% increase in revenue as well as expenditures over the FY22 budget. As mentioned, it's aligned with council priorities. Top of that list of priorities is compensation, and there is in total about almost $7 million identified in compensation increases. Those include a 5% increase as well as additional public safety increases, and we've discussed each of those previously, so I won't go into many details with that. In the case of education and community safety, this proposed budget provides more funding for education and for community safety than any prior budget in the city's history, and also continues to advance on capital needs within the community through its capital improvements program. Some of the highlighted projects are identified on there as well.
Mr. Kyle?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Sure.
But let me say something to the council a little.
Sure.
Same thing you're saying, but let me say it a little differently. Today, I'm hearing thoughts about the budget and not adopting the budget. If those things are out there, we need to discuss them today. That's why we're having this session, to make sure, because, I've been doing this, and this is my 18th budget, and I can't remember one that we had, the council had an objection to. So I would not like for this to be the first one do that. So let's clear that up today. If there's something that we need to dispel or we're concerned about, we have the people here, because I've been, getting on the telephone talking to people and not having the folks here. Let's try to dispel that. That's why we're going through this exercise today. That's so important. And if it is, let's open it up, and we got the people that can answer a lot of the concerns that you may have, my colleagues. So let's make sure that we clear that up today, and that's why we're here. Thank you, Mr.
Sure.
Kyle.
Thank you. And I should have mentioned, let me pause here too, I should have mentioned at the beginning, I said what this presentation is. Let me explain very briefly what this presentation and this item on the agenda is not. Because at the public hearing, or at the meeting last week, remember, we had the public hearing on the budget as well. We took comments regarding the FY22 budget amendment, which deals directly with personal property tax. And this is not dealing with the FY22 budget. This is dealing, obviously, with the proposed FY23 budget. More discussion will occur with the FY22 budget amendment in June, and so there'll be additional conversation regarding personal property tax as well as other revenues that have outperformed budget expectations as we went along. I do, though, want to take a couple of seconds to highlight just a few things that have transpired since we last spoke regarding the FY22 budget. Of course, at that time, there was a lot of attention paid on what the county had done versus what the city had done, and I just need to be very clear with folks that both entities, as all entities in the state of Virginia, determine the value against the J.D. Powers NADA guide. So in other words, you all do not set the values that are ultimately taxed. That is established by state code that the Commissioner of Revenue is obligated to actually follow. They use the lowest or second lowest value published in that guidebook to establish that value. Then what happens is when that value is established, and the market determines that value. So basically what people are buying and selling cars for establishes that value as established by the J.D. Power NADA guide. Once that value is established, then you assign your tax rate to it. And of course, in our case, our tax rate is 3.45. In the case of Roanoke County, actually, their tax rate is higher, it's 3.5, so it's slightly higher than ours. In the case of Venton, it's a percent even higher than that as well. Then once those values are established, the tax rate is applied, that of course becomes the bill that is presented. The General Assembly in this instance, because of what they had saw going on, have created a couple of options. One of those will go into effect in July to offer some form of relief. There were communities who were taking action on relief that was not explicitly authorized by the General Assembly. We've talked about that before with Lynchburg, and to some degree even, I would say, certainly the action that Roanoke County took is not explicitly authorized in that statute as well. And then finally, I just want a few other things that have changed is, one, of course, Roanoke County did indeed grant that relief. Roanoke County's receipts are still going up $3 million over what they had budgeted, even with that relief granted. Salem last week made the option not to grant relief and is proceeding in the same direction as you all have, as well as Montgomery County taking the same action as you all have. Now, again, that doesn't mean any of those jurisdictions, ourselves included, won't consider the rebate once it becomes available in July. That will be the discussion in June. So I just wanted to get some of that, again, of what we're not doing and what kind of lies ahead as we look into June.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I thank you, Mr. Cowell. I just want us to slow down just a little bit and make sure that we're clear, because I think there's been so much confusion when we talk about FY22 and FY23, and we all know what that means, but I think sometimes the public may not zero in on exactly what we're talking about. The personal property tax is due this month, correct?
Correct. The end of the month, yes.
So at the end of this month, I mean, almost everybody pays their personal property tax. They pay it in full and they pay it on time. So at the end of this month, we'll have a much better idea of exactly how much money comes in as revenue for this year's budget, the budget that ends June 30, 2022.
Yep.
Right now, we have some estimates, we have some projections of what we think that may be, but we don't know. So in June, we have the opportunity to look at what actually came in and what makes sense in terms of what we can to do or not do. In terms of, actually at that point, it would be a rebate. It's not a discount in advance. It would be a rebate after the fact,
That's
which
correct.
we cannot do under the state code until sometime after July 1.
That's correct. That's correct.
That's what the General Assembly has established.
Right.
And I wonder if you can tell me what percentage of the city's budget, and I apologize for putting you on the spot with this, maybe Paul, what percentage of our budget for street maintenance, fixing potholes, repaving streets that need to be improved and so forth, what percentage of that budget comes from the state of Virginia?
From the state share?
Yeah, what's the state
Let me
share?
give you an anecdotal answer, and then we can probably find the specific answer. So there was actually a comment made at the public hearing about the fact that I'm sure that we receive the same amount of state support as does the county for
That's
streets.
where
That's
I'm
not
going.
true.
That's where I'm going.
That is inaccurate. We do not receive.
About 4 or 5%. Mr. Workman would probably have that number better than anybody else I know. 4 or 5%.
And-
What
and-
percent of Roanoke County's funding for street maintenance, pothole repairs, and repaving streets and so forth comes from the state.
Much more as in the case of all of it. So
100%.
they do not maintain, their maintenance of streets is done by the Virginia Department of Transportation. Everything from snow removal to pothole repair to new street construction is in partnership with the state of Virginia. And that's true across the entire Commonwealth.
Right.
Municipalities are responsible for streets in a different way than counties are
Difference
responsible.
between cities and counties. One of many differences between cities and counties, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole right now. I just think people need to understand that we have to look at clearing the streets when it snows. We have to have money in our budget to do that. And the county doesn't. We have to have money in our budget to fix the streets. And I don't know about the rest of my colleagues on city council, Mr. Cal, but I don't get any complaints that we're fixing too many potholes in the city of Roanoke. I've been on council almost 16 years now. I've never had anybody say, whoa, y'all are fixing up too many potholes. Not once. So I just want to put a little context around this whole discussion. I understand that it's a huge increase for a lot of people. I appreciate the fact that the way the system works is if you have a vehicle valued at $1,000 or less, you don't pay any car tax. I think the number should be at least $10,000. I think if the car tax had been implemented the way it was talked about during the campaign prior to establishing no car tax, which of course never happened, then probably up to $20,000 of value people would pay no car tax at this point. We can't change that. Those decisions were not ours to make, and we can't make different decisions now. But I think that we just need to understand the difference between when people say, well, Roanoke County did this and Roanoke City could do this and so forth, and understand that we're not talking about the budget coming up. We're talking about the budget that we're finishing up right now between the next couple months, May and June, and then we're finished with this year's budget. So I hope that we can do something. Let me say that right now. But we won't know what we can do or what makes sense to do until after May 31.
And again, you'll have much more discussion in June, and nothing you'll be asked to do today or on May 9th has any impact on what that decision can possibly be in June. So,
Yeah, I just
again,
want everybody to be crystal clear that that's what we're talking about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Somebody, I heard somebody.
I am, but
Okay.
I wanted to make sure.
Which one?
Since, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since that door has been open and we're on that subject, I do see in the budget that you do have for maintenance, street maintenance is $836,887. I see that. I also see where the snow removal is, $169,233. And while I do know, just as Mr. Bestfitch has pointed out, that, and the citizens should know, that we are different than Roanoke County, that Roanoke County streets are maintained by the Virginia Department of Highways, and that we do get money from the state for that reason. And I do see in our budget for paving, and that's what you had put out, that we would be using the surplus one-time funding for paving, not streets, but for paving. And that the paving program was $4.3 million with an increase from the state for $49,000. I get that too. However, I still feel that, and you have pointed that out, that there will be an option perhaps, hopefully, for a rebate, and that we will discuss that, I hope. The only difference I see is between what the county may have done and what the city of Salem did. The council did speak on it beforehand. That's something we did not do. Council did not, as a whole, discuss any ratio at all. We went by what was recommended, and that was it. And the citizens were never aware of this increase coming. And I think that's where the upset comes from, is that they did not know. And now we want to try to make it right after the fact, which is fine. But even after May 31st, some may not have even paid their personal property taxes. And plus, they will have a penalty and interest added to that,
If
which
they don't.
I do believe if we had had that discussion, we may have been able to avoid that, even though, as Mr. Bestfitch said, we won't know now until the figures come in and the money has come in after May 31st. So again, I do hope we will consider some type of rebate for some relief for those who are eligible for that, for paying those high increases in the market value of their vehicles. Not the ones that not the ones that were not affected by it, but especially those that were.
Yeah, and again, you all will absolutely have that opportunity to discuss that in June. The only exception I would make to that is, while it is true that there has never been an official agenda item among the council on this item, certainly, so the council as a body has not discussed this item. I would disagree that the residents did not know, or the taxpayers were unaware that there was going to be an increase. I think the Commissioner of Revenue went to great lengths to make that aware, and there was quite a bit of media conversation regarding that as well. Certainly, there was awareness. Now, again, not disputing that the body.
No,
had not
I agree
talked.
with that, because the awareness came after the Commissioner of the Revenue and I had spoke about it. And we were trying, and I had tried to get my colleagues on council to discuss it. So yes, the media did cover it after the fact, but it could have been done better. I think communication should have been done better, and I hope going forward it will be. Thank you.
All right, so that was our slight detour into making sure everybody knew what we're doing and what we're not doing. So I'll go back on to what we are doing, which is the FY23. Just to continue again, some of the highlights on the screen. As we have mentioned before, I'll draw a note down to the Star City Strong Recovery. These are the American Rescue Plan Act funds, and that unlike many communities, we are not using those funds to balance our budget. Those funds are going into community investments in the area, and that's why you generally don't see those dollars included in the budget, because they're separate and they're guided by the direction that you all have already provided previously regarding that. No one, I think, champions any increase in tax revenues. People don't like paying their taxes. We all, I think, understand that. However, taxes are collected for a reason. That revenue is collected for a reason. That is what pays for teachers. It is what pays for police officers. It is what pays for street improvements, and go through the list of things. Without those revenues, we don't do what it is that the residents and the citizens require in their community. Everyone is feeling the impact of inflation, not only this year, but actually historically, and we are no different. So what this graph illustrates, and we've shown this before in the hearing or in the meetings, is it identifies, and the blue lines are revenue. So obviously revenue has been fairly steadily increasing over the years, and then the red line shows the purchasing power, in effect what we can actually buy with those increasing revenues has at best held steady, and more recently is declining. So even though revenues are growing, what we actually are able to purchase is actually declining because of the impact of inflation. And it's actually more pronounced than what this graph shows, in that this graph is based predominantly off the CPI. So that's what you and I and our residents go out and buy. So that's the basket of goods, if you will, that we purchase in our normal existence. We don't do that in the government. The things that we buy are actually accelerating at a much greater rate than are those residential, if you will, items. Think, for example, price of cars have definitely gone up. We just talked about that. So an individual, if you can even find one, an individual purchasing a car will be paying more for that car this year than they might have 2 years ago. It's much more pronounced if you're trying to buy a police car or an ambulance or a fire truck. All of those have gone up significantly higher than what those personal vehicles have. Imagine the price of gasoline. Oil has gone up. We pave streets with oil. It's asphalt. It's all oil-based, so those costs are going up significantly higher. The cost of construction, significantly higher. So it's even more pronounced than this. And this slide, again, is just to give kind of a dose of reality to, even as revenues increase, what we can actually purchase with those revenues continues to be eroded as we go forward. Some of the items that we have heard from each of you, and I put in this category items that 3 or more of you shared with us in our individual meetings, made it on this list, and or items that came up in the public hearing. So I wanted to kind of quickly go through these. And some of these we are proposing making adjustments to what we submitted based on what has been shared. And in other cases, we'll kind of explain a bit more and answer questions that you might have. The first one was dealing with the Cultural Endowment. This came up in our one-on-one discussions. To date, the city has provided $1.25 million to the endowment. You may recall that the endowment is building value over an extended period of time to get to a point where they can then start using it to provide funds for arts and culture groups, but not affect the core portion of those dollars. So it has a long way to go before it reaches that point. Along the way, it's doing intermittent activities that are assisting the arts and cultures community as well. This is a public-private partnership, so our $1.25 million is being matched by similar donations from the private sector of an equivalent amount that is out there. We had previously, this used to be a decision made basically one time every single year. A couple of years ago, I moved it into the base budget so that the $125,000 that's in the proposed budget is in there each year, and as long as funding is available, it's just part of the base budget. We are proposing, based on the discussion that was had with you all, we are proposing to increase that base budget. This is different than the proposed budget, so this is a change from the proposed budget, increasing that by $75,000, which means the new base budget for the Cultural Endowment going forward will be $200,000. We are also proposing to develop a funding formula that will enable its growth to a maximum of $250,000 annually, and that will incrementally work its way up. And we'll talk about that at the retreat. We don't need to do anything relative to that now. Just want to kind of give you a heads up that rather than have this discussion every year, we're anticipating formulating a way in which there is some at least predictability of how that might grow over the next few years. So that's the Cultural Endowment response from what we heard, again, from some of you, or from a number of you. Tree planting came up in the public hearing. I just want to explain a few things that have gone on. So the urban forestry portion of our organization, which is the group in the Parks and Recreation Department that is responsible for maintaining the trees and the tree canopy that we have, street trees as well as trees in parks, that we already have, has an allocation of almost $700,000, $668,561. And that takes care of all of those maintenance needs as well as new tree plantings, tree removal, and so on. Back in the FY20 budget, we added one-time $30,000 to their expenditures, and then in '22 that was added as a base. So that the amount of money, and it was specifically for tree planting, so the amount of money that was identified for tree planting was added to or increased by $30,000 beginning in FY22. So just to give you, and the objective there was annually to be able to replace about half of the number of trees that had to be removed. And there's some logic to that, mostly which has to do with capacity, how many trees they actually can put in and be responsible for maintaining as they go along. That amounts to somewhere between 150 and 300 additional trees beyond the trees they were already being planted at a cost of somewhere between $200 and $400 per tree. That's the urban forestry side, and as you all will recall from previous presentations, we also, with certain street projects, so think of the Melrose project that's under construction right now, there will be street trees planted as a part of that. There are other street projects that do also result in the planting of trees, as well as some of our stormwater projects. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. And I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Sure.
Does this include replacement of diseased trees or?
This does. So the urban forester is responsible for going in, let's say a tree is damaged in a storm or is diseased, they'll remove those trees and remove the hazard associated with those trees. They've always had a certain amount of money in their budget to replace those trees with time. This $30,000 actually was put in the budget to ensure that at least half of those trees every year will be replaced. So it does include those trees as well. Above and beyond that, trees that are getting planted as part of street projects or stormwater projects are not drawing from this source of revenue. They draw from their own source of revenue with it as well.
And to that point, and you don't necessarily have to answer
Sure.
it today, but it just occurred to me that sometimes when trees are replaced, they're not, are they comparable to the trees that they're being replaced? For example, like you mentioned about the trees on Melrose that provided a beautiful canopy. How will those trees be compensated?
Yeah, so
I know they can't be the same size, but if you could just explain.
Right, so trees, there's only a certain size tree that you can reasonably plant that will actually survive, and they tend to be 3-4 inch caliper kinds of trees. Almost all of our trees we put on street trees are actually canopy trees, so they are the ones that will grow that actually provide the canopy and the cover. But obviously, in a lot of cases, we're replacing trees that are 75 or 100 years old. So clearly, when those trees were planted, those trees were of the same size as the trees we're planting now, and 75 years later, they reached their maturity, and that's the same approach. It's the only approach that you can actually take. You can't replace, obviously, a 75-year-old tree with another 75-year-old tree. It will be replaced and grow as it works its way through. The only change in species tends to be if there is something that is a disease within the community. So, for example, you might have had ash trees planted a lot that you will not see planted any longer because of the ash borer. So you certainly will see a change in species in some instances. And in our parks, we've started planting, I think, a lot more diversity in the trees so that it's not all red oaks. It's not all whatever. There'll be a mix of ornamental or flowering trees as well as shade trees in those. So those are some of the differences that you'll see.
Thank you for the explanation. That helps.
Yeah, no problem.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Cal. I just want to take a moment to remind everybody out there that we also have the commemorative tree program. So those citizens who think we should plant more trees, and I'm one of them, have the opportunity to plant a tree in honor of someone or some event that they think is particularly significant. If some organization has a milestone anniversary, that's a good time for them to get together and everybody pitch in a few bucks and buy a tree. Someone passes away, it's a wonderful way to honor them, to keep their memory alive, plant a tree in their memory, which has been happening for about, close to 20 years ago now. But there's always opportunity for more. So I just wanted to remind everybody that you can do that and help us go past only replanting half of the trees that are removed. And of course, as you said, that half doesn't count the trees that are planted as part of street maintenance or stormwater projects. So it's actually a little more than half that get replaced every year.
And also, of course, you have events like Arbor Day events where private citizens can also secure, often at no cost, trees from other sources that they then would put in their private property as well. I mean, the reality is most of the canopy that exists within the city exists on private property, not on public property. So these trees we're talking about are only, obviously, public property trees.
All right, Ms. Monroe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just only have a question, Bob, with regards to the tree canopy. Over in the northwest section where we have the heat-in islands,
Yes.
Are there plans to put trees over there?
Yeah, so one of the discussions still as a part of that heat, the urban heat island conversation that's been going on with stormwater, actually is the one that's leading that, is exactly how do we respond to what that is in effect telling us. And for those of you that aren't familiar, or for anybody that's tuning in, that study was done as it was done across a lot of communities. And typically what they found were in poorer urban areas, there is less tree cover, either because historically there were areas that didn't have trees, or they didn't have trees planted when homes were built, or there's been underinvestment by the community and by private individuals in putting those trees in. And what that has done is created a higher temperature in those areas, and has been demonstrated in a number of studies that higher temperature contributes to poorer health outcomes associated with it. And that study was presented about 2 years ago, I think, here with stormwater, and they have since that time been starting to formulate different responses and different plans. So yes, I do think that will inform, not necessarily all of these, because a lot of these are street trees, although some of that will be. One of the challenges in Northwest is a lot of our streets don't have the street planting area that you put the trees. So it's more likely, I think, in those cases to end up looking at areas like in parks where you would actually see plantings go in. I failed to mention that too. Also, in our building construction also includes, so when we build new library, for example, it includes additional tree plantings. But I think that's where you're likely to see the responses more on those public properties versus necessarily street trees as we come into those areas.
Right, and my last question is, how many trees have been, you may not know the answer to this, and that's fine, but if you could get that answer, how many trees have been replaced in this fiscal year. I noticed where you say between 150 to 300 trees each year. I'm just wondering.
And I don't know, but I can get that
Right, I
for
didn't
you.
think you
Yeah.
would know the number right
Yeah,
off.
we can
but I would
definitely get
be-
it for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And what we've done in the past when we shared that with you is we share what has been done by urban forestry as well as by the streets department as well as by stormwater, so you get the full picture. So we can certainly get that for you.
And do you have a list of places where these trees, for like this year or going into the next year, where they would be planted?
I don't
Do
think
you-
so, but I'll check.
Okay,
and
because I'm
see.
just trying to figure out what type of system you use or
Yeah.
criteria as to where trees should be planted.
And I'll find out for sure. A lot of it is based on what trees get damaged or have to be removed, and then we come back into an area. But I do know, for example, last year, they did a lot of tree planting along Brandon Road, for example, in the street area. And so I think there are some of those that are predetermined, and then others are more responsive, so we can get that for you.
Yeah, and I do want to commend, again, with what VDOT did with the city on 10th Street.
Yes.
Where you put the trees along the street line,
Yeah.
which I think is a great
Yeah,
thing.
and that's a good example of a street
Yes.
project that actually resulted in additional tree planting that's not
Yes.
covered in this piece.
Yes, thank you.
So at this point, we are not recommending anything different than what we've proposed. We feel like we're doing, at this point, what we have the capacity to do based off of the staffing levels that we have and just the amount of trees that can be planted at any given time. I would certainly encourage, as Councilmember Bestfitch has said, there are other ways, if residents feel that they would like to contribute to that, certainly can expand beyond what we're able to do. Now, that may change in a couple of years as we continue to grow that capacity and stuff, but at this point, we feel like the additional 30,000 we added into the budget is sufficient for those plantings.
Bob, let me ask you one question before we get too far from the Cultural Endowment. We recommended $75,000 increase on that?
We are recommending a $75,000, well, we did not in the budget, so the budget recommended level funding, $125,000. We are now, after conversation with you all one-on-one, we are now suggesting that the final approved budget next week include another $75,000, and then we'll talk about a formula that may increase it beyond that at your retreat. So,
Wow. Okay. I just didn't remember that, but that's something that we get little tidbits about because there's some people that's following this budget pretty closely. And I'm just thinking about the guy that lives over in Southeast that makes $12 to $13 an hour. And the increase is 75, that's a big number. But if we say that, if that's what the majority of council feels like we should go.
And this 75,000 will be coming out of one of our contingency accounts, correct? Out of LAPS, okay. So you all know, obviously, we estimate how much funding we may have based on vacancies in the organization. And so this is actually taking some of those dollars and dedicating it to this purpose. So this is not increasing it's obviously not increasing the overall expenditure of the budget. It is not increasing, obviously, the revenues that we're anticipating taking in. It's just reallocating where it was going.
Okay.
The next item this one came up in public hearing as well, and this deals with transit. And all of you should be aware of this. We've included in the updates, in the last couple of updates to council on our weekly updates, but just to help remind folks and also to offer a response to what came up in the hearing. So what came up in the hearing is pretty consistent with has come up in the hearing before, which is the desire to increase the operating hours of transit as well as the days of operation. And you all have probably heard me say this more than one time, which is it's one of the easiest things for me to quantify what it would take to do it, because it is one of those rare instances where it is purely money. And the reason I say that is because we get a fixed amount of money from the FTA, Federal Transit Authority, and from DRPT at the state level. That money's fixed. Anything beyond that is money that we provide, which you all do. You all provide a pretty heavy subsidy to transit so that we can operate what we actually operate. The general manager at Valley Metro knows exactly, for example, if we were to add an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to the day on buses, how many drivers, and what the cost of that will be. It's one of those rare instances where it's a pretty easy mathematical calculation to say this is what it would take. We have always been unable to actually take any of those steps because of the amount of funding necessary to do that. We actually have this moment a rare opportunity to do so. So with One of the recommendations that came out of the Star City Strong Recovery Advisory Panel was actually to dedicate a certain amount of the American Rescue Plan Act funds to a mobility initiative centered around transit. So $3 million has been identified for that effort, and it really involves two components to it, or will involve two components. And I should preface this by saying that this is all information that's going to be shared or presented to GRTC, and the board will actually decide some of the definitive parts of this. But conceptually, this is what's being discussed. So that includes, one of those is a microtransit pilot program, which I'll explain in just a second, which would extend hours and introduced Sunday service, and also bus stop enhancements, which includes a range from putting in more what we refer to as kind of landing pads. So as people, we may not be able to have a full shelter for a variety of reasons, but at least in more instances, people are not just stepping off the bus onto mud, that there's something that they're stepping onto. That won't be universal, but it'll be more than we have today. But it will also include areas where we can accelerate the deployment of shelters and potentially even sidewalks getting from the shelters to the other sidewalks that are in the area. The reason we're saying a pilot study is because we believe that if we can conduct this for a year or 2 years, depending on the ARPA funding, and demonstrate that it actually is receiving ridership as is projected and the miles that are actually being covered with this system, we believe that that actually can result in an additional funding allocation from FTA and DRPT, which would turn this pilot into a more permanent program. It is not the extension of the bus service that you see right now, so we're not talking about running our Valley Metro buses for more hours or on Sundays. We're actually talking about what amounts to a kind of a van service. So it would be a kind of a combination of fixed routes as well as on demand or scheduled, if you will. That allows us to have fewer of those buses running a lot more nimbly from location to location while providing that level of service. Some of the details are on the screen, but again, much of those details still will need to get worked out as we progress through the discussion with GRTC. It is very likely, very possible that that service will have to be contracted out. There are discussions, obviously, that have to be held with the union that represents the operators there at Valley Metro, and also cost, so and capacity, because obviously we don't have any extra bus drivers at the moment, nor do we have any vans. So that's part of the reason why it's very possible that service will be contracted out as we go forward. The shelters, again, we're going through sort of an assessment. We already have GRTC has a fairly good assessment of where there would be benefit from having shelters, and those are usually your high use stops. The challenge, as you all know, historically has always been being able to get the land necessary to actually build the shelter, as well as the ADA required access points to and from the shelter. The idea is to use these funds to perhaps help some of that and deploy those faster than we might otherwise be able to do. There are some other efforts we may be able to do depending on how much these end up costing over the life, but that is the response ultimately that we're putting for. We're not proposing any change in the budget that we've presented to you, that the transit expansions and enhancements will actually come out of the American Rescue Plan Act. So that is why we're presenting this information to you, is to show that indeed that issue, and again, historically, we've just been unable to actually offer any kind of response to those inquiries because of the dollars involved, and this is that opportunity perhaps to not only take care of this in the immediate, but hopefully secure more permanent and sustainable funds through DRPT and through FTA.
All right, Councilman Cobb.
Thank you, Bob. This is great news. I know that when the GRTC adopted the strategic plan for public transit in Valley Metro, that one of the long-term goals was to add extended hours to cover all three shifts and to add Sunday service. So the ability to be able to do this as a pilot, I think is an incentive for people to try this out. I like that it's a mix of fixed routes and on-demand, because I think that's also what we hear for people who work later, whether it's in industry or restaurants or businesses that stay open later. This provides an extraordinary service, which I think we're going to see the benefits from. And I appreciate you pointing out, because this is true of a lot of the ARPA-funded initiatives. Part of our challenge as a council in this budget process is to look at the the effectiveness and the impact of these one-time ARPA dollars and how we can sustain them over time, so that we're not just doing like a 1 or 2 year investment, but the programs that are really making an impact in the community, we can sustain them. And I think this is one of those programs. I did want to ask, I know last year, and I can't remember which budget cycle this was in, there were to be new, and I apologize, I can't even remember the exact number, but there were to be new bus shelters put along Melrose. And I'm not aware that those have been placed yet. Was that in this last budget cycle? Was it, or was there just
Yeah.
not a limit to when that might happen?
I don't know. We'll have to check, because I think there are bus shelters in the area that we're currently working on, the streetscape in Melrose. That definitely is a part, and that project
Okay.
is set to be concluded in July, is
Okay.
when that will be. If there were others, that would fall back onto the GRTC board
Right.
and kind of their budget, and I don't know
Okay,
if there were
well,
others identified.
I'll bring that up at our meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think if there was anything else on this. I think that's all I have on this one for now.
Thank you.
Mr. Carroll.
All right.
Thank you, Mr.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Carroll, can I do a follow-up on the bus station, the shelter?
Sure.
The one at Valley View, it's been on the list for so long, and
Forever.
there's been so many snags. Is
Yep.
that at the top of the list this go-around?
It is always at the top of the list.
Ms. Price is gonna get that straightened out now that she's back.
Yeah.
I know she will.
The issue there is actually not money.
Is the easement or something?
Yes, it's, all of that area is all privately controlled. So it's privately controlled by the entity that actually owns where the Walmart is. It's privately controlled with the party that used to be Sears that now is somebody else. And even the road itself out there is actually under the control of Valley View Mall. All but one of those has in the past been very interested in this happening. Walmart has been very interested in this happening. The mall itself, mall management has been very interested in this happening. The ownership of the Sears, which is actually physically where it would need to go, the Sears property goes all the way up to the area that we're talking about. They have not been interested in this, in part because they were going through bankruptcy proceedings at the time, and in other instances, they just didn't necessarily see the value like Walmart has. So it really has continued, and that issue has not gone away. That issue is the issue, that's the impediment, is we actually have no land there to put a shelter on, because we've got to get the landowner to actually agree to that piece. Now, there are other locations possibly you could put it, but they're not in proximity. You'd have to put it out on one of the public roads. You could potentially put it like way in on the mall property, but then it's not convenient any longer. So short answer is yes, it's at the top of the list. Do we have a resolution for it? Does GRTC have a resolution for it? No, not yet.
But we were negotiating with someone to make that happen, or to try to
We're
make
always
that
talking
happen.
with someone. It keeps changing.
The person, yeah,
who
because,
that-
a couple of years ago, I talked to somebody who was very enthused about doing
Yeah.
it, and we thought we were making progress. I said something to Ms. Price, yoo-hoo, and then it stopped.
Yeah.
So,
Because
just very
the players-
disappointing to see all of those folks standing out there in the rain.
Yeah, that is one of our most heavily used stops, and would definitely qualify for this kind of effort and stuff. The other thing I wanted to mention, just to be certain it's clear, is with the extensions that we're talking about, these extensions will still be in cooperation with our transit partners in Salem and in Benton. These extensions will not go into Roanoke County, because Roanoke County does not have a partnership with us to provide transit service for their residents, and so this would not extend. Some of you remember in the plans that GRTC has approved do indeed call for these kinds of demonstration projects out into the county, but they necessitate the county's involvement both financially as well as politically in those efforts, and that just has not yet happened.
And if I could, just to add to what you just shared, Vice Mayor, there is a proposal, a plan that has been shared on placement of a shelter in the Valley View Walmart area. Ms. Price, I don't know, remember if you were on GRTC when that was actually presented?
For many years.
Yeah.
It's been
But this
going
is a
new
newer,
plan.
this is a newer plan. And the, as Bob said, the party that's not yet on board is the Sears property, but we do have support from the other two, so.
Yeah, we've had a lot of support from Walmart and from the mall, mall management. I mean, mall ownership itself went through a bankruptcy here recently as well, which complicated some of the discussion, but.
Well, and I want to reiterate too, because of the challenges that are presented there, part of this plan was to make all of it, the access from every place ADA accessible. So there were no barriers for access to this. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that.
All right, I'll tell you what y'all can do to make this a little better. You can just say mayor and I can get your attention. Mayor and I can turn it. But by this like
I
that.
know, this is a little bit different. I had some questions about I'm going to have to go back because I was used to us going through it and then coming back with the questions. But it looks like we're doing it a little differently today. But the one thing I wanted to say, Mr. Cowell, and I appreciate you bringing up the fact that we pretty much don't have reciprocity as far as the other localities willing to extend the bus routes to Benton or to Salem. I know that came up.
We do with Salem and Benton. So Salem and Benton are active partners in our transit.
It's just is it Roanoke County?
Correct.
Okay, so, yeah.
There is, we
Is
do.
there some caveats or some
Yeah,
other
well, we
nuances?
do partially go into Roanoke County because of Tanglewood.
Yeah.
Because
So
of
one of the
Tanglewood.
loops there is partially in Roanoke County, and we feel, I feel hopeful because of the collaborative work we're doing with Economic Development Department between the city and the county and Oak Grove and Cave Spring that there's potential for this.
Yeah, people want to see that, but, and I don't think they fully understand why it is not happening. So I'm glad that you shared that with our residents.
Let me just say, before anybody else got it? All right, I'll get right to you, Mr. Let me just say that we've had meetings with Roanoke County Board of Supervisors and this council, and that was a point of contention. We got there because nothing we've said this morning is new. We've been doing this for years, trying to make this happen, and there's no cost. And we've asked the county to step in, and so I'm hoping that we just finished working on a project, cooperative project with the county regarding fire stations, and that was recognized. I want us to continue to, when we can, if they're willing to, and they've had some changes over there, to meet with them and talk about these kinds of things, because it's been on the table for a while, and just like the shelter in front of Walmart down there, it's been on the table for a while, and it was a no, then an absolute no. Then no, it's difficult, but we can keep working on that. But I think that's why I'm an advocate of and I've said this a number of times, is that we can do, and you've heard that we do a lot of things regionally together and to help one another. And I think this is one. And we need to, keep talking about that. And I think, glad you mentioned Tanglewood, because a lot of people, believe me, didn't know that wasn't in the city. They just thought that was, that was a city. But that's the county. And so, but I think it's something that we probably can continue to look at. If we don't meet but once a year with the board, I'd like us to have an agenda set where we come to the table and talk about those issues that we have in common.
Yeah, and I'm confident someday we'll get there. Together with our partners in Roanoke County, we jointly operate an airport, we jointly operate a water authority, we jointly operate broadband authority, we're jointly developing an industrial park in Roanoke County. So certainly we've been able to reach a lot of agreements regionally, and I would feel this one ultimately will get there as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Moon Reynolds.
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on the conversation with regards to the bus shelters. At Walmart, you said Walmart was in agreement, was
Yes.
supportive. Are there discussions to put a shelter there? I noticed because of I guess the patrons over there, they're having to cross over Valley View Boulevard with children trying to get up to the top of the hill by Bell to catch the bus. So I'm just trying to see, is there conversations?
Yeah, the area
to
where
put
the
that?
shelter would go would avoid that. It would fix that issue. Walmart is very interested in that because it's their customers, so they want to be able to accommodate their customers. The area where it would go to achieve that isn't owned by Walmart. It isn't owned by that same landowner. It's owned by Sears, actually, who extends. Remember, that road is actually owned by the mall and by the end users in the mall. So, but yes, that's exactly what the intent of it is. We can't actually put the facility inside, if you will, the parking area. It's not safe
Right.
to do so. It has to be up on, and it's not convenient either. It really needs to be up on that road. But yes, that's the plan. We just need to get the folks that actually control the land where Sears was to be an active partner.
So not where they're currently catching the bus, on that concrete pad?
Yeah, it would
They
not be in
cannot
that
be
same.
anywhere in that vicinity.
Right, and there's not enough room to actually, because you got to be able to have the accessibility
Yeah.
to be able to get in, so we need more space for that to take place in that area. And I don't remember, Anita probably remembers, I don't remember exactly where the proposed area is.
To the left,
To the
over
left.
there, that
To the
little
left.
road where it's like some of the big trucks, the tractor trailers park over there.
That's right, it's where the, yeah.
So that was, yeah, on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can show you
okay,
that.
over
There's
toward
actually been.
Target. The side where Target is?
No,
at?
no.
Going over to Sears.
Sears is across the street,
Right.
it would be more to the left of that, over in that corner.
Yeah, Sears.
Okay, without crossing the street.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, Sears
Still on the
throws
same
you off
That's
a
what I
bit.
mean. That's
Yeah,
what I was
but
just
the-
trying, that's what I was
Yeah,
trying
no,
to
you
get
wouldn't
to.
be crossing the street, you're
Right,
on the
that's
left
what I
of
mean
it.
for safety. I was
Yeah,
just
referring to
trying
it
stay
as
on that
Sears
side.
throws you off a bit because
Yeah.
Sears actually owns underneath the road, the ring road, all the way over to that area. So it's not, when I say Sears, it's not really about
Are you
like
referring
the
to where
store.
Panda Express is going?
No,
Okay, never mind.
no,
That's
no.
okay.
We'll show you, we've got a
We'll have
graphic,
to
so we'll
show
show
you.
you.
You have to show me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you come out of the gas station.
Yeah, I know it,
If you
right.
make a left,
Uh-huh.
you would continue left, but you don't cross the street. It's
Oh,
all
okay.
around in that.
Going around
cur-
okay.
around
I
that
know where
curve.
you're at now. Thank you.
So that is,
Well, that was the proposed.
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
things may have changed because
Yeah.
I'm sure Mr. Cobb on GRTC can take.
Yeah.
so that
Just still
was the
thinking of
item,
safety.
again, in response to the question that came up regarding transit in the public hearing. The last item I have of the items that came up either from council individually or from the public hearing deals with fire EMS. And I apologize because this one's somewhat long in order to try to address as many of the factors that were raised as we go through this. So first, before I start this, I certainly want to continue to acknowledge our support of the firefighters and those in the fire service. And more importantly, or as importantly, I guess, really are their families as well, because we do ask a lot of our firefighters as well as their families. It is for those reasons why they have earlier retirement options than do the rest of our employees. It is for those reasons that the state mandates presumption on certain health conditions, meaning if they get certain health, they have certain health issues, it's automatically assumed to be associated with their service in the fire service. And that you, the council, have established a separate pay plan for public safety, as well as granting bonuses and compensation increases well in excess of that offered by our other general employees. So hopefully, there's been an acknowledgement of the service that they provide and the dedication of that service. I appreciated the reflection back that they provided to you all on our core values. It's good to know that they know those and that they apply those. I could, but I won't go into discussion of two of our other core values that they did not discuss, which deal with respect and honesty, but I'll save that for another day, perhaps individual conversations with some of them. I will focus, though, on some of the facts as we go through that I think hopefully will help kind of put a little bit of context into the discussion and ultimately lead us to a place where we can move forward with this particular item. So let me share some of those. I would not blame at all someone who listened in on the public hearing to be left with the impression that the proposed budget you have in front of you, the FY23 budget, actually includes a recommended pay cut for fire EMS personnel. Nothing could be further from the truth, and I know you all know this. Every single fire EMS personnel that is sworn will continue to receive compensation increases through the proposed pay plan greater than what was possible under the system that pre-existed the pay plan that we put in place last year. This is in addition to a series of hazard pay bonuses, recruitment bonuses, and retention bonuses that I requested and thankfully you approved. When this effort to increase compensation began about 2.5 maybe years ago, firefighters in the city started at $38,639. Currently, that number is $43,800, and up until recently led the region. We had the highest starting pay for firefighters that has since been matched by the county. Bonuses over the past 2 years have amounted to $6,000 for each and every member of fire EMS. In the approved FY22 budget, fire EMS compensation increased by $990,000. In the proposed budget that you have in front of you, that increase is an additional $1 million. The claim that personnel are taking pay cuts is factually incorrect and not very honest as well. Every full-time sworn personnel in fire EMS, again, received $6,000 in bonuses and compensation increases through the approved FY22 and the proposed FY23 budgets, again, exceeding all of those provided all other non-public safety employees. Let me look a little bit more specifically at the folks that we're addressing you. For this illustration, I'm not going to use names or ranks. I want to maintain some level of privacy, although everything I'm sharing with you is public information as we go through. Those that spoke have the following current salaries: $69,870, $69,870, $82,719, $85,102, $88,229. These salaries exceed 90% of the full-time positions in this city. The top one actually exceeds, there are only 50 people in this organization that are paid higher than the top salary that I just listed. Prior to the implementation of the step pay plan to which they spoke in opposition, those salaries were $54,697, $55,814, $64,004, $74,164, $76,583. The individuals that spoke received $29,295 more in compensation as a result of the implementation of the step pay plan, which I requested in the FY22 budget, versus if we had stayed the course and the plan had not been implemented as was requested. The statement was also made that they would have been better off had they not been promoted. This too is inaccurate, and I'll provide a couple of examples on this. So I'm going to give you two examples. At full implementation of the step pay plan, remember that we had indicated we would try to implement this step pay plan over the course of 3 years. We started in this current year, FY22. We're proposing the next step, FY23, and then ultimately, if funds are available, FY24 will be its culmination. So in this example, at full implementation, this individual would be paid this individual will be paid $86,224. So that would be the salary at full implementation, would be $86,224. Whereas if this individual had stayed at their previous rank, their compensation would be $86,845 prior to promotion, which would, if promoted, which is theoretical because, again, as someone said in this, you can't count money you haven't earned yet. But in theory, if they were promoted at that point, had not promoted previously, waited, and then promoted, in theory, they would be placed at $95,529. Keep in mind, those promotion policies have not yet been finalized. They're making some assumptions based on some of the earlier discussions that have been had. But it would appear in this example that the claim that they would have been better off not being promoted is accurate. They had a loss of $9,300, except that by promoting when they did, that by the time they got to the point at which they can theoretically be promoted, they have already earned $32,361 more. Obviously, it makes sense. If you promote early, you start earning more sooner as you work your way through. So in that instance, what they have presented to you as a pay cut actually has resulted in $32,361 more from when they started to where they are currently. A second example would have at full implementation a salary of $71,618, whereas if they had not been promoted, their compensation would be $66,402. And again, if theoretically promoted at that point in time, would have a pay of $76,694, again appearing to show a loss of $5,075. However, that individual has already earned, by promoting when they did, $34,873 more as a result of that promotion. So in neither of those instances is the statement accurate that by taking a promotion they took a pay cut. And indeed, in one case, and indeed all of them combined, if you look at what they actually are earning because of the step pay plan that we requested that you put in place, just those individuals that were standing at this podium earned a combined $110,750 more in compensation than they would have had we not had the step pay plan in place and had they not promoted as was indicated. There was also discussion of turnover being as it was associated apparently with the consequence of a new step pay plan, which, as stated on the screen, the objectives of this, when we started this was because of concerns that had been raised regarding our competition, our compensation levels, as well as the ability to address compression, competitiveness, increasing predictability. All of those things were objectives as we worked our way through this. If we had not taken the pay plan, I mean, none of these options would have been available. They simply would have continued under the old plan, which was you got the same percentage increase all other employees did. So last year, instead of receiving what they received by virtue of the step pay plan, they would have received a 3% pay increase. And this year, they would have received, if approved, a 5% pay increase. Of course, they're receiving more than that in both of those instances because of the step pay plan. Turnover was mentioned, and again, associated with the implementation of the step pay plan, even though the step pay plan, of course, was put in place specifically to address issues that we were having with turnover, i.e. put more money into compensation so that there would be less turnover. So let me give you a few facts associated with this. Overall, as with most public and private organizations, our turnover continues to increase. 2012, we had 45 retirements in the organization, and a 7.2% rate of turnover, not counting retirements. 2018, retirements went to 61, from 45 to 61, and a turnover rate, not counting retirements, of 11.3%. In 21, our retirements actually fell back some, and we had 57 versus 61, and we have a 14.9% turnover rate without retirements. This is overall. This is not in fire EMS. This is overall in the organization. Specifically to fire EMS in 2021, there were 30 departures. That includes retirements, which is less than what we experienced in the planning or in the police department, which was 59, less than in human services, which was 43, and less than with sheriff, which was 32. More than general services, which was 27, public works at 24, and parks and recreation at 12. Public safety positions that are experiencing the most recent turnover increases include police officers at 52%, deputies at 32%, firefighter EMTs at 23%, and police officer 2 at 17.1%. However, when you shift to non-public safety, benefits program specialists, 36%, maintenance technicians, 33%, family services specialists, 32%, maintenance technicians, 25%. So we have a number of non-public safety positions that have much higher turnover than what is being experienced currently at the fire EMT side of things. All of that turnover that I just mentioned in those non-public safety positions is occurring for jobs with much less compensation than what is being provided to public safety and specifically fire EMS. Indeed, during the discussions to prepare for this budget, Human Resources presented a scenario to management for consideration of greater compensation being provided to those high turnover non-public safety positions. Some of you have asked about the DSS positions and the turnover associated with that. One of the scenarios they presented to me would have put more dollars toward those positions to address their compensation and those turnovers. Instead, we opted to continue to progress on the public safety pay plan, and in the case of police, actually advance to the final stage of the pay plan in order to ensure that our public safety folks were receiving greater compensation, again, than all of the other positions within the organization. Fire EMS vacancies to date have averaged around 12, which again is significantly less than the police department and less than the sheriff, and well within what the incoming class size can accommodate. Actually, as of this moment today, fire is overstaffed by 11 individuals, not vacancies, but overstaffed by 11, and that's because the recruit class just graduated and came into their location. So again, any argument that somehow high turnover has been a result of greater pay through the pay plan, I find a bit curious, to say the least. Over the course of the first 2 years of implementation, we're 2 years into this, 2 years of implementation of the step pay plan, public safety compensation has increased by $5 million. So we were paying our public safety folks, fire EMS, sheriff, and police, $5 million more than we were paying them just 2 years ago, if the budget is approved as presented. $2 million of that alone is going to fire EMS. In the press release and as they stood before you, these employees that requested of you to not approve the step pay plan included in the FY23 budget. It's actually the exact same step pay plan that you already approved in the FY22 budget, because nothing has changed, except we did increase that entry-level pay up to that $43,000 plus number that I shared with you as well. If you were to take the action they have requested, then each member of fire EMS would receive the same 5% compensation all other non-public safety employees are receiving. That would result, the action they requested, would result in $167,010 less in compensation than what I'm proposing in the FY23 budget. Rather, as they've described it, not very well, and I think with errors, what they actually have concerns about is not the pay plan itself, but how the pay plan is being implemented. And this is around two different areas that I want to touch on. One of those is placement based on tenure at rank versus tenure in the department, and the other is how promotions ultimately will be handled. Tenure at rank is both logical, practical, and I would actually say affordable. And let me give an example. A less tenured captain or lieutenant, frankly, has at rank, meaning they've been a captain for 3 years, let's say, instead of 10 years. That captain has less experience at 3 years than they will a captain at 10 years. And therefore, they are also likely to be compensated less otherwise. What their proposal is if they've been with the department for 30 years and they happen to be a lieutenant or a captain at this moment, then they should be placed at the equivalent of a 30-year captain or lieutenant. That makes no sense, and it's not affordable either as we work our way through. So that's why we and most other pay plans use this approach of placing folks at rank as they get placed on their pay scales. Again, pay scales that didn't exist 2 years ago that I requested and you put in place so they could realize these compensations. These options wouldn't even have existed if we didn't have the pay plan in place. The process that will be used to promote personnel through the ranks has yet to be finalized and will not be, in the case of Fire EMS, even put into place until at the earliest the FY24 budget. So they have concerns that have been expressed. And I will acknowledge that some of these concerns have some validity as to how promotions will actually take place once everybody is placed on their pay plan as they work through. And their interest there is consistent with my interest as well, which is to ensure that folks are not promoted and in effect leapfrog by rank those individuals that have already been there, so that someone, again, who is a 4, 5, 8-year captain still is making more money than a brand new captain as they come into that area. But again, those policies have not yet been finalized, and they won't even be used until at the earliest FY24. They are in effect speculating what may happen if the plan is implemented in a specific manner that hasn't yet even been completed. These concerns, as I mentioned, are known to HR and to myself, and we'll continue to work with Fire EMS leadership. That's through the chief. That's who I work with to establish our pay plan as we go through. We work with the chiefs and the leadership and responsibly address these issues. I will say one last thing, which is I was surprised, disappointed, I don't know what the right word is, with the fact that they certainly have the right to do so, that the association presented their issues before you. Given the fact that I have never been directly contacted by the association to discuss these items, I think the last time I was contacted for such a meeting was probably 2 years ago when we met, talked about just some general ideas, many of which actually ultimately led to the establishment of the STEP pay plan. I contrast that with the meetings that I have had on a regular basis with the police association, who have requested these kinds of conversations. They, in effect, have asked you to solve a problem that actually you're not provided the tools to solve, when in actuality it is administration's issues to deal with if issues exist as we work our way through. Based on all of this, I continue to recommend that the council adopt the FY23 budget as presented, based on what we've already discussed in these other items, which will include the recommended public safety pay plans as presented. And if there is a desire to do anything different, then I would simply remove the STEP pay plan that relates to Fire EMS, and they will receive the same 5% as recommended of all other employees. With that, I will be happy to answer any questions, and if you want a lot of details, I've got folks from HR and others here as well. So, thank you.
All right, I'm going to go down the line, and Councilwoman Vivian Sanchez Jones has a question.
Thank you, Bob, for your explanation. I would like to get some clarification on something that one of the firefighters said on last week, is that if you take a promotion,
Mm-hmm.
let's say from captain to battalion chief, you tend to lose at least $6,000.
That was their claim? Yes.
Yes. How is that?
It's not accurate. That was the example I gave. So let me give an example
Yeah.
again of one of those. So if I'll use this one. So an individual that promoted from captain to battalion chief, that individual would have, at the projected step of implementation, so when we get the whole project completed, he will make $86,224. That will be his salary, $86,224. If he had stayed in the previous role, so if he had stayed as a captain, where he would be placed on this schedule is $86,845 through that process. And then if he, take it one step further, because what they're really arguing is, if at that point I promoted, I would make even more money if I had stayed at the lower ranks. So in that case, if he were promoted, and again, it's theoretical because we have not settled out how promotions will occur, his salary under their argument would be $95,529. So it would appear, under that scenario, and I believe they stood here and said this, is that they would lose as much as $9,300. But again, in reality, from the time that he promoted to where he is now because of the step pay plan, he has already received $32,361. He's made more money, not taken a pay cut as they had represented or exhibited with it. Because what they're negating is those years that they wouldn't have received pay increases while waiting apparently for some theoretical promotion as they go forward. And again, a promotion process that we have not yet finalized as we work our way through that. So the only way I can answer that is that their information is inaccurate, or their characterization of that information is inaccurate.
So if somebody has been a captain for 19 years, let's say, so his pay plan will be, his pay will be $86,845?
I don't know, because literally each person has a slot on the pay plan. So out of all the firefighters, they have a specific spot that they get placed. The example I gave you was for a specific person.
I'm just looking at this.
Right, and that pay plan, so when you look at that pay plan, imagine a couple hundred people scattered all across that pay plan. It isn't as if we're saying everybody that's a captain is paid here, everybody that's a lieutenant is paid here. They could be paid anywhere along that pay plan. So I can't answer that question without knowing specifically who the person is and then telling you where they would go. Now, the example I gave you is an actual person who stood here, and I can tell you exactly where they would end up on that list. But otherwise, I can't do that because it really is based on individual people.
Because my impression by looking at this is a time and rank, correct? Or
Time and rank is correct. So where you're getting placed, and this is true if you're a sheriff's deputy, if you're a police officer, or a firefighter, EMS personnel, you will be placed in your rank based on time and rank. So again, captains that have been captains longer will be paid more than captains that have not been there as long, lieutenants likewise and stuff.
So
that is not necessarily based on how long you've been in the organization.
Okay, so let's say if you were a lieutenant making 96,000, now you get promoted to captain, and that will be a battalion chief to captain, let's say, because that's the example I have here, will be $86,000?
Not necessarily.
$66,000, according to the,
How are you calculating the
no,
promotion?
I'm just looking at the chart here. Captain,
No, because I think what you're assuming is that if you go from captain to battalion chief or from lieutenant to captain, I think you're going back to the beginning piece of it, and that's not how that's used.
because it's time and rank.
Yeah, but not when you do, that's why I say promotions don't work that way. The promotion policy actually will promote people up into that next rank in a different way than where you start. So when I talk about time and rank, it's where you start.
Okay.
And then the promotion process will differ. Now, what their concern is, and again, this concern is not illegitimate, and it's a piece we're working on. It does not affect them at this point and will not affect them at the earliest until 24, is if you take someone who is at a lower rank, a lieutenant or a captain, and you promote them, and if that promotion results in their pay exceeding that which all of the other captains, say, for example, make, there's a concern there. There's an issue there. But that has not yet been decided. That has not yet been finalized. And in fairness, we're working through the exact same thing with the police department as well as with the sheriff's department so that we work our way through. But you do not go, and they're not saying this piece. I don't believe they're saying that if I'm a lieutenant and I promote to captain, that I'm actually going to the very first step for captain. They're not saying that,
Well,
because that's not how it would work.
Well, that's the impression that I had from what you said, because they don't have 20 years experience as captain, so therefore they have to go
Yeah,
back to number one.
And so let me back up and say, so when I'm saying, when you set the people originally in their place on the scale, remember, this did not exist till last year. There was no pay scale. What you're looking at did not exist. It was just a list of people and how they were paid and who they were, and they all got 3%, 2%, 5%, whatever it is everyone else got. This was an effort in working out to try to actually spread them out across a pay scale based on tenure and rank, and giving them some predictability so they could move their way through that. They could look ahead and say, I know if I move to the next step, this is what I'm going to get paid. It's not subject to that normal 2% or 1% or 0%, as some of our employees have received. So when I talk about placement at rank, it's that very original placement. Because no scale existed, we have to figure out where to put them on that scale. So that's that first piece. The second piece then is, how will someone, once they're placed, how will they get promoted? That's the piece that's not finalized yet. That's the piece that they're making some assumptions on that they can't make yet because it's not been finalized. So where do I go if I'm a step 15 lieutenant and I promote to captain? Where will my salary be? That's the piece that has not yet been finalized.
Well, but according to the chart, we'll be at 66.
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
That's not
Because
correct.
it's the first step in being a captain, no
That is-
experience as a captain, so therefore you go to
But that's not
step one.
accurate. That's not how it will be used, so.
Okay.
No. I mean, I'll give you an example. Right now, one of the scenarios is, take the lieutenant, an example you're using.
Mm-hmm.
So place that lieutenant in whatever step it is. One of the examples being used is when they promote to captain, they just promote straight up. So if they're step 15, they promote straight up to step 15 and captain. Now, that is problematic if we end up implementing it that way, but that is a scenario, because what does that pay?
Straight up captain at 15, it will be 89. Lieutenant at 81.
Correct. So you would go from 81 to 89 under that
Correct.
scenario. Yeah.
So on the old scenario, where I'm stuck at is, okay, they're making 81, so they'll go back to
But they-
first step
But they
as a
won't, they
captain.
won't do that. That's, again, you gotta keep the two separate. The time at rank is where we place them originally on the step pay
Correct.
plan. Then everything after that's based off of what the promotion policy will be, which is not finalized yet.
It's not finalized.
But I can guarantee you,
Those
that solution, that final solution is not that you promote and go back to the first step in that other one, because that obviously does not make sense and would not yield what we're trying to accomplish.
Well,
And
that's-
again, I don't think that's actually what they were, I do not believe that's what they were saying. What they were indicating was, if I had waited, in effect, and moved myself along that pay scale, and then I promoted straight up, I would make more money than if I had promoted earlier. And that's not accurate, because that entire time you're waiting, if you had promoted, you're of course making more money all along the way as you go forward.
So-
And they're discounting that amount of money.
I have one more question. How many officers are waiting to be promoted right now?
I don't know that. I'd have to find that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to know how, what would be their pay increase?
Yeah. Yeah, now again, the way we did it, and this is really getting inside, this is another reason why I think that it was I know it was inappropriate for them to stand here and help and ask you to solve this problem, or what they perceive as problems, because the document you have, the tool you have, is that pay plan. That's it. And all of these other things we're talking about, those are all administrative functions, not council functions. And so I apologize for getting somewhat in the weeds, but let me get in the weeds here for a second with that question regarding promotions. Is, so while we're implementing the program, the way we're handling promotions is very different than what it will be handled at the beginning. So first step in this process was place everybody at the beginning, so that very first number on each of their ranks. That was the very first step. So this year, what happened is everybody went from where they were paid to the beginning. If they were lieutenant, that first pay is lieutenant. That first pay is a captain. That first pay is a battalion chief, so on. That was why and I don't have it in front of me, but when I told you the numbers, they were making, 54, and now they're making 68. Step one this year was get them all bunched up at the beginning of each of their pay grades. That's true for police, fire, and sheriff. Step two, which is the one we're actually asking to undertake in this budget, is to move them halfway to where they ultimately will be. So now you're starting to see them spread out. They'll start spreading out on it. But we're still only halfway to where they're ultimately going to be. If in the meantime somebody were to promote, so like say this year somebody had promoted from lieutenant to captain, they would have promoted right at the beginning of that pay period, because everything was in advance more than they were making anyway. But that won't be the case once this pay plan is fully implemented. Once it's fully implemented, there'll be a different promotion policy in place from what we're using while we implement it. Because again, everybody is moving up in these salaries from where they were, because all of these increases exceed the 3 or 5% or the normal promotion between those. So what's going on as we implement is going to be different than once it's fully up and running. We'll start to actually experience that with police, because if the budget's approved, we're already moving police to the full implementation of their, so we're actually skipping a year for police and moving faster with them, and that is due really to those numbers that I shared with you, the vacancy rate, the turnover rate for police, so that we can actually help close those gaps much faster than we're able to with police. So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Sure.
Are you,
Yes.
Councilwoman Price?
Mr. Cowell, I certainly appreciate your going into such great detail in trying to explain this. So my question is kind of basic. In evaluating this new procedure, in looking at, and from what I'm hearing, this is somewhat new as far as putting a actual pay scale in place. And it sounds like there's still some things that do have to be worked out. In my past life, I've sat on many salary negotiations between administration and rank and file. So I guess my question is, and you kind of alluded to it, but I think we need to know what has happened today. Who are the actual stakeholders who sat with you, administration, or with whomever, to kind of mitigate this conversation and go over these initial concerns and trying to iron them out? And I guess my main question is, does there need to be an establishment of specific stakeholders to make certain that all required parties are at the table to mitigate and figure out some of these things that came up from last week? And like you said, now they're coming here, and it's not necessarily the appropriate
Sure. So
placement.
The way that we discuss compensation within the organization starts really with HR. So human resources actually is responsible for maintaining all of our pay scales, all of our pay grades, all of our policies. And that is so that they're uniform across the organization and so that they're equitable and fair across the organization. So they're the ones, of course, that every year are evaluating a third of every one of our jobs to see how competitive they are and a whole host of other things. Matter of fact, again, remember they made a recommendation that we actually find dollars to actually increase those DSS salaries because we're recognizing higher turnover. So that's their job. They're sort of alerting us to those and then managing the system as they go along. They are also the first point of contact, I'll say second point of contact, of concerns raised by individual employees regarding their compensation or practices or what have you. I say second because first is their supervisor. The person they work for is obviously the first person they should be speaking to about any concerns that they have associated with compensation or any of the other human resources related things. Now, so that's their role. My role is, of course, we engage and work directly with the leadership of those organizations. So I interact with the fire chief, I interact with the police chief, I interact with the director of general services, the director of public works, and so on. And they certainly are alerting us also to concerns that might exist, be it competitiveness, challenges they're having in filling positions or not, recruit schools. A good example of this is, that's why, for example, a couple of things. That's why we're running, in effect, concurrent academies at police, is because we wanted to use that. Chief came to us and said, can we run it faster in order to get more people through? Absolutely. So we're doing that. That was an issue that the chief brought forward. The fact that we even offer 2 police academies normally a year was because previous chief had brought that issue forward. We've authorized overhires, so if by some miracle they had a recruit class that exceeded the positions that we actually had available, we still have them go through recruit class. We'll just add to that because we know vacancies will come up. All of those kinds of things are coming up through the chiefs or the directors of the departments and their interactions with their staff as they work through that. In no instance, well, let me add one more. In the case of the police and of fire EMS, they also have themselves formed an association that is representative of some of the rank and file, if you will. And that association will, on occasion, seek meetings with me directly. And so certainly talk through those. Again, fire was probably almost 2 years ago, I think, the last time that they asked to meet with me. Police, we've been meeting fairly regularly over the last several months at their request as we go through. But I will be very clear, I'm not negotiating salaries for individual firefighters or police officers with those individuals. What I'm listening to are concerns that they've raised about operations, and it can vary. I mean, it could be facilities, that they're not happy. Back when we replaced Fire Station 7, part of that was because the association was raising awareness of the conditions within which they were working or they were asked to work. It could be equipment, it could be staffing levels, it could be any host of things. But again, that's just to raise awareness. I am not negotiating with them on those specific items. That's the job of the chief. The chief's job is to inform me of what those issues are, and we'll work our way through what those issues are. And the reason being is because we have 1,800 employees that we have responsibility for, that have services being delivered all across the city, none of which are actually represented by a similar kind of association, with the exception of Valley Metro, which is actually unionized. They're a little bit different, and only a portion of them are, and that's with a private company. That's not actually with us. That's with a private company that we contract with. So that's how we do this. That's how we work through this. So that's actually how the pay plan came into existence, was in those conversations. Was the idea that they wanted a system that had more predictability. They wanted a system that addressed the compression that we were experiencing. Because again, everybody was just on a list, and it just said, everybody gets 3%, everybody gets 3%. And eventually that starts to bunch up. So that's how that came about. That's how the ideas regarding the $6,000 worth of bonuses that have been paid over the last couple of years, that's how those ideas came about. All of those came about through that process and through that discussion. I'll switch a bit here to police and say that as we try to implement this pay plan, and as issues bubbled up either through the chief or through HR or through those discussions I had with the associations, then we have at that point we have to decide at that point, are these with merit, and if so, what options might exist to address those? Or frankly, what options are we not going to address? Because some of the issues that are brought forward we're not going to address. Because I have, again, 1,800 employees that we have to make certain that we proceed. I'll give you an example of this. So when we went to the minimum $15 an hour in the organization, because of the hours that they work, the entry-level firefighters were obligated to have an increase in pay. That's how we got to that $43,000 plus dollars, is when you work out the equivalent of their hourlies, that justified an increase in pay. There were objections from individual members of the association to that because it compressed. Now they were moving up closer like as in $5,000, closer to what maybe a paramedic was making or others. I did not follow through with that objection because I thought it was an appropriate and necessary thing to do. If we were going to raise everybody's entry-level salaries, then we were going to raise those, even if it meant now that pay was a bit closer to those paramedics than they were before. So that's the process that we've used. That's the process that we will continue to use as we work our way through trying to figure out what's the best and most fair process of paying folks in a competitive fashion as we work, and for and really fairness for what they're doing, the services that they're providing.
Well, thank you. And like I said, I appreciate your going through, that lengthy detail of how we got to where we are today. And I'm thinking perhaps, like you said, and please hear me, I'm not saying that, you or administration are in the position of doing any negotiating. I just think it's important that we have a conversation about the process itself. Who are the stakeholders? who necessarily should be represented. And so now I'm thinking perhaps leadership within fire and EMS and police, perhaps they should look to also make certain that they're hearing all kinds of instances so that these things can be addressed as opposed to trying to figure them out at the ninth hour.
And I can assure you, both of our chiefs do that. Chief
Well, and
Hoback
I
maybe
think that's
even-
important to hear.
Chief Hoback, maybe even to a fault. I mean, I think he basically lives in HR's offices raising concerns that he hears through the ranks. Not all of those concerns are going to be addressed. We're not, just because someone raises a concern does not mean we're automatically going to address that concern. Again, there are 1,800 individuals that work in this organization that raise concerns. I have, for example, we have whole collections of employees that are picking up solid waste, for example, that receive no city benefits, as an example. That should be dealt with. I can't deal with that in part because I'm placing the dollars that I'm placing to try to shore up public safety and trying to address those issues that have been raised through there. Not everyone is going to get everything that they ultimately want.
Absolutely.
And I will say, the system that we've put in place, because it's yielding much more dollars in compensation than it did before, is better than what we had before. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. And it will continue to evolve. And there, as I said, in the promotion piece, we already know there are some issues that we need to resolve as we finalize the implementation of it. I would, however, still take exception with the characterization that somehow what we put in place that is realizing, again, I'll go back to my numbers, $5 million more going toward compensation somehow has resulted in a pay cut. That just is false on its face. So that's the piece that, but to your original question, just as I have met with the association multiple times, I'm more than happy to meet with the association, the Fire Association as well, and talk through this. I'm happy to meet with individual employees and talk through things as well. It doesn't, none of those, it just doesn't, it's not I don't characterize it as a negotiation. I characterize it as them raising their concerns.
Raising concerns and hearing a voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Ms. Monroe.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on what Ms. Price just said. When she was asking about the stakeholders, I didn't think I heard who was involved or who were involved with the fire EMS compensation when you all were talking about.
The step pay plan?
Yes.
So the step pay plan, again, the idea of the step pay plan, actually, to be honest, the idea of the step pay plan originated with the Police Association. So the Police Association came in some conversations with us, and this was alongside long-standing conversations with the then chief of police at the time about the need to actually do more with compensation around law enforcement. And we at that time always treated our pay structure was paired up. So fire EMS was basically starting pay for fire EMS was same as starting pay for police. So that's what started the conversation, was bringing of those issues. We then actually worked with HR, actually hired a consultant to actually come in and craft this work. That included a number of conversations. Matter of fact, we're going through that right now with the entire organization, non-public safety. So that study is underway right now, where they're working through every single job we have, every single pay grade, all of those things, and making recommendations on how we can adapt and adjust those. Same thing happened here. Basically, they went through with the consultant made recommendations. Then we went through months of conversations with the chiefs, and periodically the association would also weigh in on kind of what those conversations were. The chiefs were actually delivering what we could. Sometimes we were doing this directly from HR or from my office directly to the employees as to what was taking shape. But again, I will not characterize it as a negotiation, because it is not a negotiation.
No.
It is us crafting a response to issues that they had raised that were built around compensation and really competitiveness, because we were also, while we're trying to address our own issues internally regarding compensation, remember at the same time, Roanoke County's doing that, Salem's doing that, the state jail is doing, or the regional jail is doing that. So we're also trying to maintain competitiveness with all of those surrounding jurisdictions that we compete with as well. So we also were having conversations, I was, as well as the chiefs, as well as the HR departments, with our current counterparts in those jurisdictions as well, as to how they were actually building their system and developing. All were using different different consultants, all were using, or some were using the same consultants, some were using different, some weren't using any. They were just kind of holding back and waiting to see what occurred. That's why when you look at, there's some similarities in the step pay plans, although I will say our step pay plan actually has more earning potential than Roanoke County's does. So when you look at the end of their step pay plan, it ends tens of thousands of dollars short of ours. That was by design so that our folks that stay here longer have the opportunity to make even more dollars as they work their way through. But so all of those folks were involved. But again, if the perception is that there's a table that employees are sitting around and negotiating what their pay is going to be, that does not exist. And that I don't have that with any of the employees. That's not going to exist within the structure that we have.
So it's fair to say it was the consultants, HR, excuse me, your fire chief and the fire association along with you who helped craft the fire EMS compensation.
Correct. And
Okay.
the equivalent would be on the police side with the association.
Yeah.
Sheriff's a little bit different because of it being an elected position. So those conversations were taking place with the sheriff at the time.
And my last question is, when do you perceive the promotion policy to be?
We will have to finish it in the upcoming year. Because
within a
remember,
year.
if the budget is still sound next year with FY '24, it is our intent to actually move to full implementation of fire EMS on that piece. We're actually working our way through that now on PD because we are nearing that point with them of completing, because we advanced their completion into the third year of the pay plan. So it'll have to be done in the upcoming year as we move our way through.
So the fire EMS compensation that we're looking at, this is not the one that you're going to be using for them now?
No, that will be the one we're using for them now, if approved.
Okay, but the
It's the second
promotion
year.
policy
Correct,
will
correct.
not be for another year or so?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
This is the second of 3 years in
Okay.
implementing the step pay plan. The police are a bit different because of the challenges they're facing. We accelerated that so that we're implementing year 2 and 3 of their plan in the FY '23 budget if it's approved.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Vice Mayor?
Mr. Powell, after listening to the fire EMS that came in with the association to address us, it is certainly disconcerting, and I understand, their frustrations, and there are a lot of nuances to the step plan. And you are right, we are certainly not equipped to address it, because we don't know when an individual started, how many COLA increases they got. Everybody's going to be all over the board, so it is really unfair for them to think that we could even address that. But I do hope that clearly there's some sort of miscommunication, or they don't understand it, or, I'm not sure what has happened, because what you just said was pretty much in direct contrast to what they said. And it was some errors. I think you said they were errors and they were just mistaken, but we need to find out what we can do to fix that. Maybe, go back over it to help them understand it. I know you're not going to be negotiating with them, but at least they can understand how it's set up, how it's going to impact them, and how it works. Because you said a couple of times they've already received $32K. For me, I was trying to understand, is that for the year? Is that since that's the increase?
Yeah, that was since their promotion.
Since their promotion. Okay, so I was trying to understand that. So I appreciate what you've done today to help clarify this. It really has helped me. I hope that it will do the same for the employees that are in question, because they are the ones who need to understand how they're paid and how they're compensated.
And I appreciate that. And the way that would have taken place is if, instead of standing at this podium, the association had contacted me for a discussion. And they didn't. Came here. I'm happy to talk with them, and still open to talking with them. I don't think what they've asked for in front of you all is actually the solution. Throwing the pay plan out is not the solution. That is what has gotten them the increases they have received. And again, would result in $167,000 less money this year, or FY '23, than what I'm proposing that they receive. So, happy to have those conversations with them so that they can understand what we're doing, and if we've presented something erroneous, that they can help us understand where that has been presented incorrectly as well.
Well, I'm glad you're happy to have those conversations. I would suggest that those conversations take place. They need to take place. Thank you, Mr. Cowell.
Councilman Cobb?
Thank you. Well, I have one question on that, and then I have a couple other questions on other things.
Yeah, because after this one,
Can
really,
we go
it's
back to the other
whatever
question?
other items you have on the budget discussion, because our targeted 20 minutes, right? So I'm going to get a drink.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about compression. I know,
we'll get to it in a
I
minute.
don't know whether HR has been specifically doing a compression study with all the departments, but I know this is something that comes up. And a particular concern is, how we address compression equitably. One of the concerns I've heard just from different people is that someone is hired at a certain position, and their starting pay is almost the equivalent of someone who's been there for
Right.
a certain amount of time, maybe 10, 20 years, and that's just an example.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that issue is being addressed kind of across the board in all of our different departments, because I know that the equity lens is something we're being very intentional about in all of our practices as local government.
That is the dreaded term compression. And so what essentially that means is if we are not, and as a city we have not, I was looking for one of the graphics, sorry. If we have not historically been increasing across the board pay at a level that allows us to keep pace with the market, then it is inevitable, and it isn't just unique to us, this is true in private sector, public sector, everywhere, it is inevitable that new people coming in who now actually command more money, we're going through this at this moment when you can't find employees, so they certainly are commanding more money to work anywhere, then you face that compression issue. So if you've been here you started 10 years ago, you started at $50,000, you can look back over 10 years and you can see years where the city provided 0% increase, 1% increase, 2% increase. Since I've been here, I don't think we've offered anything less than 2%, I think. And 5% is the highest we've offered, if approved, offered in a decade probably. If the market's moving faster than that, that situation is inevitable. So there's two things we try to do with that. One of them is, three things. One is the least desirable, which is I can't afford you. I can't afford you as a new employee coming in, and we do that all the time. Someone comes in and says, well, the market demands that I get paid this amount, and probably they're right, but because the next 5 people in line above them aren't paid that way, I can't actually often we can't hire that person, which means at times we pass up good talent because of the market reality. So that's one outcome. The second is if it's close, one of the things we can do is we look for parity or equity within pay. So if we've got folks that are kind of congregated around that same position, a couple $1,000s maybe separates them, and we need to hire that person in, it's within range that we can make it work. We may very well at times go back and adjust the salary of those individuals right around them, just slightly, just to at least maintain some separation between them. So that's one way we also do it in a limited capacity. The other is more wholesale, which is the study that we're undertaking right now, which is, and again, this is what we did with the public safety piece when we brought them in, is we had a lot of folks all bunched up. There was hardly any difference between, different ranks and different times that people had been in there. So in this case, we brought in the consultant that is actually evaluating just that, and ultimately will help us figure out where should folks be placed so that we can start to spread out on that compression issues. The way we do that along the years is I mentioned that HR looks at a third of our positions every year. Part of the reason to do that is to identify kind of those hot jobs where we might need to make some adjustments, and we've done that. We've done adjustments with DOT workers, we've done adjustments with 911, telecommunicators, I'm thinking DSS, we've done that before, where it's evident the market's moving faster than we're able to provide funding for the whole, and so we pull out a group and say, okay, we're going to address this a little bit differently and do that piece of it. So there's that regular kind of study that goes on every year, and then about every 10 years or so, you undertake this large study, which is what we're undertaking right now. And a big piece of it is to look at, is there a way that we can kind of break through compression? And of course, all of this depends on affordability, because, we started this conversation by talking about revenues and about, whether or not we should offer rebates or any of those kinds of things. All of those revenues are what makes these kinds of things possible. Obviously, if we're talking about adding $5 million to payroll, I've got to have $5 million more of revenue to be able to do that. So all of those are factors that go into that particular piece. And the graphic I was looking for is somewhere on my list. I have the examples of the pay raises. that we've offered over the years. I don't know if you guys remember those, but, and it would just, it just kind of exemplifies what I'm talking about. And if I don't have it, that's fine.
Well, even if you could just share that with us.
Yeah,
that would be
we've
helpful.
presented it before in one of our briefings. It showed like over the course of a decade, the percentage increases that, that took place, or didn't take place during those years. And, you know, if your cost of living is going up at 3% or 2%, and you're giving 1% raises, you're losing ground. If certain employment categories are accelerating, like, say, technology, are accelerating much faster than CPI, but you're still giving them a 2% pay increase, but their pay scales are moving at 5 and 10% out in the competitive marketplace, you're not going to hire those folks. You're just not going to get them. And when you do, you're going to start seeing that compression as it moves its way through.
So I'm gonna move on to a couple other things, because I feel like we've gotten a lot of good information, and other questions that I have I'll raise later. At our last budget briefing, I raised the question about the COLA formula rate for retirees. Do we know, and Amelia, maybe you can answer this if Bob can't, do we know what that projected percentage is for this year and
It will be in
next year?
excess of 3%. It was 3.1, yeah, 3.1%.
For this year, right?
yes.
And we don't, it's too early to project for next year, right?
That will be the one that applies if you approve the 5% budget, 5% increase.
Okay, so I guess I'm thinking of
In the current year?
we're in.
The current year, because we did 3% budgets, and this just, I'm just kind of guesstimating here. I would have guesstimated that's probably a little over 1% of what was approved this year.
Okay,
Because again, it's based off of, the formula is based off of the current, whatever the current employees receive in terms of pay increases, and then there's a percentage of that is applied to it that
Right.
goes forward and stuff. And,
okay.
yeah.
So around 1%, which is the standard this year.
It would have been, I'm guessing slightly over 1%, but I don't remember.
And then project for,
Just
One and a
less than
quarter.
1.25? Okay.
and then for next year, about 3.1.
3.1,
Okay,
yeah. Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
I wanted to talk a little bit about this is in infrastructure, but and I want to give a shout out to General Services for the Star City Safe bulk cleanup that happened in Northwest, and I know that different parts of the community have reached out to see that replicated throughout the city, which I think is important. But I really hope that we can concentrate some efforts for the southeast part of the city. There seems to be just a disproportionate impact of these issues showing up, and it's complicated, I know that, and there are a variety of reasons. We have incredible blocking groups throughout the city who are volunteering their time as citizens, and yet the work is kind of overwhelming. So I don't know what the budget implications are for that, because my sense is that this weekend's effort came out of ARPA.
Yeah, it not out of ARPA, but it came out of funds that we had set aside for the Star City Safe
For the
initiative.
Star City Safe.
You know, the good thing is in some place like Southeast, one of the biggest challenges with a kind of community cleanup effort like we just undertook in Northwest is the lack of or the dearth of community kind of involvement or participation in it. They're more successful the more people in the community are there to
Exactly.
get the word out, as well as to help kind of gather things up. And in the Southeast, you have that pretty solid. The good thing is there with the I Heart Southeast group and the very active neighborhoods that are in the area, I think you could pull one of those off and be quite successful with it. The costs associated with it really are predominantly in the form of overtime, because obviously we're paying our folks to be in there on a weekend, as well as whatever additional tipping fees for the tonnage that we're transferring into the landfill with it. But really, I would not let budget. I don't believe that budget stands in the way of us being able to do it as much as it is community engagement in that. So we need
Right.
we really need an active community. It's not successful if all it is we send a bunch of sanitation trucks out and go pick up stuff. We really need the neighborhoods and the communities to be an active partner in that effort. And I think you could definitely make that happen in the Southeast.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, it's got to be sustainable, because this is not something that just suddenly happens and then goes away.
Right,
It's
right.
a consistent, and there's an ebb and flow to it. Along those lines, how do we prioritize placement of trash cans and adding trash cans? I know that requires additional stops and pickups, but do we kind of have a strategic way that we know where they are, we know where we need to add more?
You know, it's probably less scientific than anybody would like. And it differs if it's trash cans in the park or trash cans like in say, downtown, or we have a few, not many, but we have a few trash cans on certain public streets in those areas. So typically, the way we would determine whether there's a need for more of them, frankly, is if when we go to pick them up on the regular schedule, they're overflowing or there's not enough, if there's nothing in it. Both of those are telling us something. A, nothing's in it, nobody's using it. Is it really the right thing to even have there or place there? Or B, it's overflowing, then is it necessary to actually have another one? As far as I know, there is not like a set standard. It's more based off of what the experience is within it. And yeah, I mean, the cost implications really revolve simply around picking it up. That's it.
Well, and I don't know that in some ways there's a compelling reason that if we see a higher amount of trash in an area that we put a trash can there, that's going to equate into people actually using it.
Correct.
Because for an example, there must be a sign on the entrance ramp to 581 off Franklin Road that says, please throw your trash out of your window here. Because it's horrific. And there's, any number of volunteer efforts, you'd have to go out on a weekly basis to do it. So this is as much on citizens as it is anybody else. But I do think it's helpful, whether it's in parks, I don't see a lot of trash cans in some of our parks, and I think that would be a good place to start.
And we don't have very many. We tend to have, think for example, and all of this is deals with staffing levels. Think, for example, the last time you went to a state park, last time you went up on the Blue Ridge Parkway, try to find a trash can. They don't exist. There's usually one dumpster someplace that you're supposed to take everything to, and it's because of the lack of staff that the state park in that example has to be able to pick up the trash. And it's not much different with us. We tend to put our trash cans in proximity to a building. So if we have a restroom there, you'll
Shelters.
find it. If the
Right.
Discovery Center, you'll find it. Out in the parks, generally, unless there's an event, if there's a special event, we'll actually have temporary trash cans, if you will, that are there that get picked up. Beyond that, I don't know that we have a lot of those out in the areas with it. And it, again, generally it just comes to how often would they be used? Because even if they're not used, we still have to have somebody go by there and check to see if they're used and stuff. But certainly if there are areas where we would benefit, meaning there would be less litter because we have trash cans, we would certainly be interested in looking at that. Like kind of along your lines, I'm not sure in many of our instances there's a direct connection between the availability of trash can and the litter that we see, because it is in places you wouldn't expect normally to find a trash can along our highways or what have you and stuff, not necessarily in parks.
Right. Well, from that standpoint, I'd certainly encourage us looking along that main corridor through Southeast on Bullitt and Jameson, Dale. The last question I have is, I know one of our priorities as a council is our neighborhood or village centers. And I know that there's a study that's either just been recently completed or underway. What are the potential impacts for these neighborhood centers and village centers in terms of budget?
Sure.
As we look ahead?
Yeah, so there is let me back up. As you all have known for years, multiple comprehensive plans, there's been this call for support of kind of it's gone through different names, village centers to today, it's kind of complete neighborhoods with the sort of this center idea. And there have been various levels of success. I mean, some parts of what you experience in Grandin and some parts of what you experience in South Roanoke and in Wasena are due to the fact that those were in the plans and that you all have adopted policies that support those. And that may be things ranging from zoning to parking requirements to physical investments in streetscape and others, but they're pretty limited. There's only a couple of those that are out there, and so part of what, after, it was actually two retreats ago, I think, after 2 retreats ago, where there was a desire to really kind of put more emphasis into this, we started moving in the direction that has now undertaken first it was a staff effort, so the staff actually went through looking at all of the village centers that are identified in the comprehensive plan, and in effect kind of evaluated them against sort of a benchmark, Grandin, and said, what does Grandin have in the village area and around it that these others don't? So that's everything from surrounding incomes to availability of property to a whole host of things. And from that, they kind of identified 15 or so that had the most attributes. Then what we've done now is we've handed that off to a consultant that specializes in this area, and that consultant is going through all of them again, looking to make sure we didn't miss anything, and then they're looking at the top ones, if you will, ultimately with the purpose to say, okay, yes, you do parking and zoning and some streetscape kind of thing occasionally. What other forms of intervention might be necessary in order to advance any of these into that next level, make them more successful, more likely to succeed with it? So part of the answer to your budget question is don't know yet, because we're waiting for the results of that to come back. No doubt there will be some budget implications in there, because they could range from policy discussions we would bring back to you about further tax abatements to actual capital investments in some of those areas. Hopefully what will come out of that is kind of a, if you will, sort of a mini plan or a menu for like 10 or 15 of these, that if these interventions were successful, we could see them make more progress on that. I think that study is, of course, right now they're focusing right now at this moment on Gainsborough, but that's just because that's the neighborhood they're in at the moment. They're looking at all of them. And I think about 6 months from now is when all their work is supposed to be completed. And there'll be in between now and then, there's going to be a lot more public conversation about the work that's going on and involvement in it as well. So then I'll have a better idea how to answer that.
Okay. And the last,
There is, I will say, we do have in this year's budget, you did approve some catalyst money that if, for example, and I want to say $100,000, maybe, that's off the top of my head, which is available that during this process, if something that's kind of really low-hanging fruit, that's really easy to implement, but requires some budget money, we've got that money there.
well, and the last thing I just want to say, and you and I talked about this in our meeting with staff, and that is I want to make sure we are so grateful for the, I'll call it seed money for the Gun Violence Prevention Commission, which has been $75,000. And as we look ahead, we've been able to secure an additional $1 million through state grants. We have the $2 million, and that's going to help carry us in many ways and supplement and grow our programs in the community, which is all important. I just want to make sure that we keep some aspect of that funding in our budget so that we don't lose sight of the importance of that, particularly as we look ahead to programs that may not fall within the ARPA guidelines or with certain grants that we get. That allows us to have some money through the city budget to implement some of those that may address some of the gaps.
Yeah, and I think, right now, just so, for full transparency here, because this would require something different from you all if you want to do this, is right now the budget that we have presented to you, because of those items that you just mentioned, the $1 million worth of state grants, the $2+ million in ARPA funds that are going toward gun violence, and the $250,000 I think that we had in the Star City Safe, the one-time $75,000 that we used last year is not in the budget. So the thinking, of course, is those dollars there are what's going to address what the $75,000 would. So three options. One is that's what you have. That's how you move forward with the budget. Another option is you actually seek to restore that one-time $75,000 out of some one-time source. And again, much like we just did with the Cultural Endowment, it will come from somewhere and come from somewhere else to go toward that effort. Or since we've got those grants in place and they're good for probably a year or 2 years, it's just at least remembering that as we come off of that, if we still need those dollars, that we know in FY24 or whenever it is that we would be expected to add those back in. So those are kind of your three options. But again, right now, that $75,000 from last year is not in the budget because of those grant dollars and the ARPA funds that are going toward that effort. So.
Thank you. Thank you,
Let me
Mayor.
ask a question to follow up on that. Bob, who manages that money? That's a lot of money that we
The-
got coming through.
You talking about the gun violence prevention? That is, the commission is actually doing that. So what when the task force recommended and you all concurred that there was funding made available through the ARPA for gun violence prevention, then those dollars are made available to the Gun Violence Prevention Commission. They went through and identified a variety of different ways for that to be used. That ranges from overtime with police to lighting and cameras, all the way through to mini grants. All of those are in there. And then some of them themselves have another process, like the mini grants, that they'll go through in order to arrive at what gets awarded. So all of that is there. The grants that were referred to from the state, those are a blend of management. Some of those are managed by the police department. Some of them are managed by our youth and gang violence folks. Some of them are certainly all with input from the Gun Violence Prevention Commission. But those grants go to the city, obviously, not to the commission. So it's kind of a joint recommendation or management.
So Angie then is a person, if council here has some ideas and thoughts on gun violence and issues that they come up, who are they to approach, say, hey, what about this? Can we use this?
Really, I would say the Gun Violence Prevention Commission. So, yes, and that's why you have, obviously, the commission is chaired by Councilmember Cobb, and that's why you structured it that way, is that commission is chaired by a council member. And so certainly if you have ideas that you want to be brought into that discussion, Councilmember Cobb, as the chair of the commission, is where you would bring those to, because what Angie's doing is just the administrative part of it. She's just keeping track of all of what's being spent and getting all the MOUs put together. So, but it's really this body, through the Gun Violence Prevention Commission chair, that makes those determinations.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that council is updated with that and recognize that, because they do have ideas. So that goes to Joe, who represents council.
Correct. On that, he's the appointment you all have made on the Gun Violence Prevention Commission, so he would do that. Really very similar to Vice Mayor on the EEAB. If there were things that, this body wanted to convey to the Equity Empowerment Advisory Board, it would do so. You've got representation on the Housing Authority. You've got several of you all have appointments, and that's why you have those appointments, so that you can relay that information back into those groups of things you would like to see undertaken by those groups.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilman Bestfitch?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and going back to fire EMS compensation, Mr. Cal, you alluded, I think, a couple of times to the fact that it's rare for us to get this far down into the weeds on something like this, and I really appreciate the fact that you are helping us get through this discussion at the level that we are, and so being at the end of the line here, I hope everyone will indulge me for a few more moments to make sure I'm clear on some of this stuff. I think I figured it out. It's kind of confusing to me at first, but I think I figured it out. I just want to confirm that the three bands on this slide that you've got up right now really should be end to end.
They are. So,
Yeah, so it
and
would
somebody
be-
had the printout, I saw, I think Vivian, you had the printout
Yeah.
that shows it across the whole and
Right.
stuff. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, they start from,
it would be way too small for us to read
right,
if we
right.
did it that way.
They start
but-
effectively from step 1 out to step 25.
25,
Yeah.
so there's 25 steps altogether, although it looks like to me that the only position, the only rank that is listed somewhere on each of the 25 steps is firefighter intermediate. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But I just want to make sure, I'm a visual person, and I should have been writing these numbers down as you were sharing them, and I didn't, so it's kind of hard for me to make sure I understood. But when you were talking about some of the examples of somebody, you had one, I think, in the $70,000 range and one in the $80,000 range, that they were at this level and they got promoted and they beat this level. They would actually experience at that point a decrease of a few $100s from what they've been making before?
One of the examples I gave you was I think like a $300 difference, that if they had waited, so let's say they did not promote, so they just waited, and then at the implementation of this system, where they would end up was $300 or $400 in the one example I gave you, more than where they were at the moment in there. But that again,
No, I get that part. We don't
Yeah.
need to go through that again.
Yeah,
But
it
I'm saying
presumes-
It was $300 or so more?
Yes, I think in that one example, it was like $300
So
more.
are there any examples of somewhere where somebody could move up to the next rank and earn $300 or $400 less? Over the
No.
course of the year?
That's
That-
exactly what I mean. That was the case where if they had, and I don't have it in front of me, what the example was, is if they had stayed at, I'm making up numbers right now because I don't have it right in front of me, if they had stayed at rank, it might have been 76.8. And if, by promoting, where they ended up was, say, 76.5. But remember, when we set this thing up and they started promoting it at that very beginning, they started earning more money at that moment. So
I get that, I understand that, and I take that point. But you're still saying, if I heard you correctly, in that particular example, that would be a few $100s less than what they were making on an annual basis prior to the promotion.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
The example that I gave you, I think that was the case.
So my question is, could that possibly occur in any other department outside of public safety if somebody's in a position and they get promoted to a supervisory or management or a director's position? Is it possible that they would move up to that higher level and end up making even $1 less than what they were already making?
And I guess I want to be clear here. They're not making less money because they promoted. Remember, the step pay plan does not exist, didn't exist when this started. So based on where we're putting them in the step pay plan, so I guess the answer to that question that you just asked is no. There's no scenario because there's no equivalent step pay plan. So for example, if someone is in transportation and they're making $50,000 and they get promoted to a supervisor, they're going to make $52,000 in it. What they're basically saying is if that person in transportation opted not to take that promotion for however long, and then, I don't know, for whatever reason, we went through a study like we're going through and it said now that supervisor should make $10,000 more, then at that point, they would be better off if they promoted. They should wait to promote.
That's crazy. I get that.
Yeah, so no, I don't think you could compare that to the other departments because none of the other departments have any equivalent step pay plan.
Well, no, I get that, but I'm just saying, if you're at, again, let's just look at this intermediate, if you're at, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sixth step on the firefighter intermediate is $65,250. If you get promoted to paramedic, do you go back to $60,450, which I think you said no?
No.
Where would you go? I
Yeah.
understand what you said about, several times here, about the fact that there's a promotion policy that still has to be fully implemented. But as of now, if this is approved for this fiscal year, where would somebody go from, they've been there long enough to get all the way up to 65,220 as a firefighter intermediate, where would they go if they got a promotion?
I'm looking to the HR folks because they're going to have to help me answer that. Because I can tell you what this year they would do. Because this year, if they got promoted, they would go to the very beginning of that pay plan because they wouldn't exist out there yet. So for example, if you were let's say a lieutenant, fire EMS lieutenant, and you're going to actually, this year, all of our lieutenants are at the beginning of the lieutenant pay grade. Correct? They're all at the beginning of lieutenant pay grade currently.
Every single one of them?
Every single one of them. Because remember, we didn't have a pay plan, so they got replaced.
Right.
So this year, if someone got promoted from the rank below up to lieutenant, they would go to that first starting point. In FY '23, everybody's going to start getting moved across that pay plan, basically midpoint to where they will eventually settle out. So as they promote in this upcoming fiscal year, that's what I'm going to need help with, because I don't know how that piece would that promotion piece. I know how it would handle at the end of the implementation. I don't know what the intermediate step is this year for that promotion piece.
Can HR, and can they answer that question, HR? I'm curious.
And if we can't answer it now, we'll get an answer for you, but.
Well, I mean, on any of these levels, it's obviously to get way beyond what the first step is on the next level up, and if you move up and have to go back to step one.
Right, and you would not, yeah,
You would not-
that I can assure you is not how
Yeah,
that works.
so
Yes.
what I want is a little bit more clarification on,
Yes.
okay, what would happen?
And we can run some additional examples that I can share with you as to, okay, all the examples I've given you is across full implementation.
Yeah.
And if we need some intermediate examples, I can certainly provide that as well.
So, again, going back to the firefighter intermediate, starting off, first step is $45,000. Now, if I'm in any other position in the city and I'm earning $45,000, and as you said, some years in the past, the across-the-board increase has been 0.
Correct.
Some years it's been 2. This year it's 5%. That's what I would get. I don't get a step increase
Correct,
in any other department outside of public safety.
Correct.
There's no such thing.
correct.
You start at what you start at, and you get the COLA, basically, increases every year as the city can afford to build them into the budget.
Yep.
So if I'm at $45,000 as in the fire EMS compensation as it exists right now, and there's a 2% increase, then I would go from 45,000 to 45,900, but the step 2 that I would move to instead is 46,350.
Correct.
But with a 5% increase of 45,000, it would be 47,250. But my increase would only be 46,350.
Yeah,
But of course, but I have the potential then, year after year, to continue moving up that step plan that nobody else has in any other departments.
yeah, so this year, while we're in the beginning stages of implementing this, getting everybody set where they're supposed to, we are affording all our public safety folks whatever the percentage equivalent is for the rest of the organization or their step. So no one's going to get less than.
Whichever is greater?
Correct.
Okay,
Now,
that helps me.
after implementation, that will be an annual discussion because
Yeah.
there are different schools of thought. Because,
Yeah.
as you've already illustrated, if it were a year where there was no pay increase available to the general employees, I guarantee our public safety folks will be assuming they will still move forward in their step, and we would do everything to make that happen. The other school of thought is similar, that if, the predictability of the step is what it is. So if everybody else gets 0, you still get your step. If everybody else gets 5, you still get your step. There are jurisdictions out there who would always set it to say, you get your step or whatever the percentage is that everybody else got, whichever's greater.
Yeah.
And also, once at full implementation, if we did a 2, 3, 4% increase, we also need to look at shifting this entire pay plan by that percentage as well, so that it doesn't age. So that'll be another consideration.
Well, that kind of gets me to my last question, and maybe I should have asked this earlier, but down at the bottom there, I'll make this a little bigger so I can read it. The higher end rate for a firefighter EMT is 43,800, which you mentioned a couple of times in your presentation. On the chart, it shows $41,000 as
Right.
being step 1.
Right.
So,
The 43.8 was put in mid-year. So when you approved the pay plan in '22, remember, this is the exact same pay plan you approved this current budget year. If you remember when we shifted mid-year to go to the $15 an hour
Right.
employees, that's what changed that number because of the hours that the firefighters work.
right, sure, I get that. I guess what I'm.
But that would be that's really, in effect, you could basically take out that 41 and put the 43 in because there is no 41 any longer.
It's 48.3.
43.8, correct.
43.8, sorry. I got it.
Correct.
But if you did that, on this chart that we're looking at right now, wouldn't that mean that everything else has to move up too?
No, that is actually somewhat the argument that's being presented.
About compression?
Yeah, because it admittedly, that creates, at least at those first points of rank, some additional compression. But again, at this point, with that exception, we're not proposing to change anything on this table till we get it fully implemented, because otherwise it's an ever-moving target. I mean, we never actually will settle out what it is. So no, we acknowledge that by increasing that starting pay, those next couple of positions right up against them are going to experience a little bit of compression as they work their way through. Now, some of that's going to get worked out because everybody's moving up into their respective places. People aren't bunched down at the bottom any longer. Eventually, I think what you're saying is exactly what would have to happen. So let's say, fast forward 5 years from now, for whatever reason, we decided we were not competitive on the starting pay any longer, and we wanted to kind of focus in on that and raise that starting pay. I would expect you'd have to ripple that all the way through the step
Right.
pay plan
Right.
as well. That's at full implementation.
Yeah.
So I do think, and again, all of that's predicated on the affordability, whether or not we can
Yeah.
actually afford it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I appreciate what a couple of my colleagues have said about getting more stakeholders involved in the conversation. And I just have to say that, I first started talking to members of the 1132 local about 22 years ago. And of course, there was 6 years when I wasn't on city council, so they didn't talk to me much. But they've contacted me plenty of times in the past to let me know their concerns about staffing, about equipment, about facilities, and about pay. And I never heard a word from anybody this year. And I just want to say that I think they have to take a lot of responsibility themselves. If they want to be heard, if I want to talk to you, I pick up the phone and call you, or I send you a message, I send you a text message or an email or whatever. You've got to take some responsibility for yourself. And I think at this point, unfortunately, it's really too late. As the mayor said at the very beginning, this is budget study. May 9, next Monday, is budget adoption. That's it. If we don't, I said to those guys the other night, after the meeting was over with and a couple of them came up here, I said, the only way I can compare what you're saying you have, which is a complete plan, with what the city manager has developed, is if you show it to me. And then I can look at it side by side and see what's the same, what's different, what's more, what's less, whatever. Never got it.
And I would actually argue that they should show it to me.
Well, of course.
That's
Of course
actually
they should show it to
Yeah.
you, they should show it to the chief, they should, there's lots of ways for them to present that information and get it
Yeah.
under consideration. But they didn't do any of those things.
And I would also
I'm
say-
just saying I'm very disappointed that would be the approach
Yeah.
they would take.
And again, I would also say, the one item that you're actually being asked to act upon is that.
Yeah.
Which actually, all of those things we're talking about, even if all of those things were valid, and they wouldn't change that.
No, I understand
It's actually
that,
how we use it.
But we don't
So-
even have, what I'm saying is, we don't even have a point of
Right,
comparison
right.
because nobody shared it with us, and maybe wouldn't have wanted to go that route anyway, I
Right.
get that.
Right.
But we never saw it.
Yeah, the pay plan is actually, I hope, it's something they're actually advocating for, because it actually increases their pay and increases that predictability. I think what their vocalized concerns are is how they either perceive it being used or how it is going to be used. That's where the rest of the conversation
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears just a little bit, but a couple things that have already been mentioned at least, outside of public safety, I do still have a lot of concern about our social service workers. I don't have the exact numbers, but I think if you compare the salaries of people who deal with benefits and services relative to the amount of education and the amount of responsibility and authority they have to make decisions that have a huge impact on families, that can really change people's lives, I don't think you can find any other positions that are paid as little as they are with that level of responsibility, authority, and education involved. So I am very concerned about that, and I'm also concerned about whether we can be competitive moving forward on DOT. I mean, these people that understand much more than I do, because I essentially don't understand anything about what I'm looking at right now, except how to push the buttons and, move from one slide to the other and type in emails and all that. I have no idea how any of it works. The people who do understand that are commanding big salaries. And as you said, when somebody says, no, I've got to make at least X amount, and we have to say, sorry, we can't afford that, then we are losing the opportunity to bring somebody in who could make a significant contribution to our organization. And I see the treasurer back there with us. I just wanted to acknowledge her and all the years and years we have spent. Hopefully we're getting close to the finish line, Ms. Powers, of implementing a new tax and treasury system. I said a long time ago that I thought it would have been better to hire the right person to develop that in-house rather than contracting out with people who are concerned primarily about one thing: profit. Not service, not effectiveness, not accountability, or anything else. They're concerned about profit. And that's, I think, why it's taken us so long. We've had to move from one to another and so forth and so on to get through this. But could we have afforded the person who really had the ability to do that? I'm not sure we could have.
Or have kept them.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if we'd hired them on a temporary basis just to put that through, and then said, okay, that's your job, it's a temporary position, once the job is completed, we'll have to figure out how to take it on from there, but I think it would have been several $100,000 to get that person, based on what I hear about
and unfortunately, I can assure you that on the DSS side of things, that those high turnover positions that I mentioned, I can assure you that both those folks, unfortunately, are paid in pay grades significantly lower than what we're talking about with public safety.
Yeah.
And they're paid further or lower in their overall spread. So you divide it up into 4 quartiles, get a midpoint. More of them are concentrated in the lower half of that pay grade, which is already significantly lower than public safety. I can assure you that is exactly where they are, which is contributing, I have no doubt, contributing to that turnover that we are experiencing in those positions, along with just the workload, the work volume, the type of work.
And let me just try to drive that point home just a little bit more. We often talk about public safety in terms of saving lives. Whether it's your house on fire or having a heart attack or whatever it may be, you call 911, they come out, they save your life. Police, in a lot of situations, get into incidents where they literally save somebody's life. If you're in social services making decisions about child protective services, you have the same level of responsibility for somebody else's life. A child. And unfortunately, we have seen this in other localities around. We've seen a journalist here in Roanoke do extensive articles about what happens when people in those positions aren't making the right decisions, aren't making decisions quickly enough, or whatever the case may be. Not to get too far afield, Mr. Mayor, I'll wrap it up here in just a minute, but I worked for a number of years before I came to Roanoke for the Department for Children in Richmond, and one of the things that we were asked to do over and over and over again by the General Assembly was to evaluate, do a study about child protective services in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and every time we did it, we came up with the same conclusion. And the conclusion always was, these people need to get more professional development training, more compensation, so that they become the experts within departments of social services, not the people who take that as an entry-level position and a stepping stone to work their way up into something else. And the last time that I was involved in saying that was 1990, right before we moved
I think we have
to Roanoke from Richmond, and it has not happened. It has not happened still.
I think
I think about those kids. When I read those articles in the newspaper, I just have to hope and pray that we never see a headline that says something like that happened in the city of Roanoke. But I'm afraid that we continue to skate on mighty thin ice trying to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Well,
Mr. Mayor, I thank you.
And we also work, our folks in DSS work under a lot of stress because of the vacancies that exist because of that. So there's no question that that's a gap in our compensation that is still in need of being addressed. That, our focus in the last couple of years has been public safety for a bunch of obvious reasons, but we can't forget, again, I'll go back and say, we have 1,800 employees. We can't forget all of those other employees as we work our way through. One thing I will say on DOT is that I didn't mention earlier that because of the specialty and really the competitiveness of those positions, that study that I mentioned that is underway currently for all of our workforce is there is a specialized study being conducted just for the technology positions for that very reason, because similarly, that technology folks also have those same kinds of gaps. Remember, they also support our 911 system, which has a direct relationship to community safety as well. So,
Well, I said what I said to you, Mr. Cowell, but I'm really talking to the other people to my left who are still going to be here on January 1 of next year and start working on FY24 budget.
yeah.
I hope you'll keep those thoughts in mind as you move forward,
Yep.
because things are not going to get better in either one of those. And there may be other positions as well that we really need to think about at some point, but things are not going to get better if we just keep doing what we've been doing, paying people less than they can make with the same level of education and responsibility and authority almost anywhere else in the world. They can make more money. That does not portend well for the future of our city, and especially for the future of our most valuable asset and most vulnerable population, the little children that can't take care of themselves.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bestfitch. Well said. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Cowell, first I want to say thank you for presenting us with a balanced budget. You have stretched that $325 million all kinds of ways, so I commend you and Million and Ms. Vernon, the entire team. I know it was very difficult, and we keep coming back with more and more demands. You can only do so much with $325 million, so I thank you for what you've done. My question is about the Sheriff's Department. I know that we pay a portion of their salaries, I think like 30%. I know this is probably not something we can do, but what can they do, or where would they address issues with the breaker panels and the cameras and segregation? Those are two things that the sheriff has asked me about a couple of times, and I'm not sure who would address that. I know that he gets money from the state for his compensation, but as far as the issues that they experience, like the dishwasher broke, I think, a couple weeks ago, things like that, how can we help them address things like that?
The facility ultimately is under our authority, under your authority. So what he does, he has a certain amount of budget that we have in order to take care of routine maintenance kinds of things. And then occasionally, the sheriff will make requests for capital items. So, for example, in the proposed budget, there is a complete replacement of the control panels. That was one of the requests that was made as they go through that. So that's ultimately how they're handled. Now, occasionally, there may be something catastrophic that happens that obviously no one anticipated that we then have to deal with through some of our contingency accounts and stuff.
I was going to say their contingency. So he has mentioned, and so we are looking at ways to help fix the breaker panel, because he said it's...
I don't know about the breaker panel. I do know that the control panel was one of the items that he had submitted. There are other items that he has submitted as well that are included in the budget.
Okay, all right. Well, I just want to make sure that we are taking a look at it.
And some of those, again, are more in the category of kind of maintenance versus replacement or capital. That's why the control panel is in that fashion, or in that
cameras and segregation,
yeah, those may be just in maintenance.
Just in maintenance.
Types of things. and
okay,
stuff,
well, I'm glad to hear that at least that they've been presented and you're taking a look at it. Thank you, Mr. Cowell.
Sure.
Let me ask you that, and I know we're running late on time. They are monitored by the state on situations that relate to health and safety and things. They're checked. If the state finds them out of compliance, which I don't think they have, at least we don't know anything about it, especially in terms of cameras in certain places, that's an obligation that we take on to pay for, or is that?
Yeah, if there's something that needs attention in the physical plant of the jail, it is our responsibility. And the state does not necessarily provide funding. They may provide an off and on grant for those things, but for the most part, that's a locality's responsibility.
Or the courthouse.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, how do we know then if there's an issue? Because they got to be in compliance with certain things.
Correct.
And if the state does not find them out of compliance, so that's just a wish list from the sheriff, something that he
Yeah,
wants to have.
these are proactive, and it's true with all, current sheriff and previous sheriff. So just like all of our departments, they will provide us proactive items that need attention with the physical plant in order that they don't fall out of compliance, or that, a bridge doesn't fail, or whatever it might be from our different departments. So that's what these are. These are items that the sheriff has brought to our attention, who says, either I want to change practices and therefore I need these improvements, or there are things that are just outdated that need replacement. And so that's what these are. These are not in response to anything being out of compliance or somehow failing based on anybody's evaluation or standard. These are things he's trying to put in place in order to do better or fix things that he thinks need attention.
Okay. All right. I hope everybody's clear on this budget.
I still, Mayor.
All right, Ms. Moon Reynolds.
Thank you. I wanted to speak on the stormwater, where you noted that you had $322 million in backlog projects. My question is, are there any ARPA funds that can be used to address these projects?
Stormwater's an iffy area. So when they approved ARPA, they approved the funding specifically for water, for example. So there's no question, you can use ARPA. Matter of fact, we have used ARPA funds by passing them through the Water Authority for that purpose. And actually, I think I'd included in your update that they've got an $8 million grant pending right now at the state for improvements in the Northwest dealing with water lines. That's actually ARPA, even though it's coming from the state. It's the state's share of it. It did not explicitly include stormwater. There have been some interpretations of the act that if it's a stormwater project that relates to water quality, that it may indeed be eligible because it's kind of tied to the same. But if it is a pure stormwater, not necessarily. So in other words, if you're just putting a pipe to relieve kind of flow of water, probably not likely to be able to use it. If you're doing something that actually treats the stormwater, you might be able to use some of it. So it's still, why they did that, I have no idea why they isolated water and excluded some of these other I don't know why they didn't just say infrastructure. Now, I will say that the new infrastructure bill that has come out definitely has items in it tied to stormwater, so there may be some options with it. What we locally have experienced, and you all remember this from a couple of briefings at retreats a couple retreats ago, is the amount of money we used to get in grant funds from the state has continually decreased. And so it's putting more and more pressure on the local dollars to be able to fund those. It's possible that the new infrastructure bill will help kind of resettle that again, but I don't know till they get further into it.
Okay. And because I had also noticed that we increasing the debt service in this upcoming year by $4 million because of last year.
Correct.
And then we're looking at adding an additional $3 million every year thereafter.
Correct.
Even though with all of that, we still will not reach that plateau of completing those backlog projects.
Yeah, obviously, we're decades away from addressing those backlogs, which, in fairness, and I've said this in other settings, is, stormwater is a utility, just like water, wastewater, electric, and so on. But as a community, and really is true across the nation, we have not funded it or treated it like as a utility until the last few years. Right. So you think about water, water's been building utilities for 100 years. So we've got all those years that we've got to try to catch up with it. So we will not likely ever really completely close that gap with stormwater. The debt service or the increased debt that you mentioned and the debt service that's associated with it is by virtue of last year. You'll recall you approved a series of fee increases on stormwater over several years, and that's in effect to be able to pay for those capital projects that need to get done.
And that, speaking of those fees, that is starting this year.
Correct.
Which will be a yearly fee of $75.60. And by 28, we will be paying as taxpayers $115.20 towards trying to.
Yeah, and as a
complete
slight
these
technicality,
projects.
I'll say as ratepayers, same thing, but these are folks that are, again, it's a utility, it's an enterprise fund.
Yeah.
So these are dollars that don't go anywhere else, they're only
Right,
able to go into
specifically for the
stormwater.
stormwater.
Right, but yes, that was remember that was what was approved last year when we went through this process, was those multi-year, and it's so that we can start chipping away at that capital list that you just mentioned.
And then my other question, comes back to you and I had a conversation last week when we met about the budget, and that is with regards to the assistant to the city manager position that you are recommending. I know that several moves have been made over the last 2 years in your office, and at this point, I've still looked at it and I thought about it. Right now, I'm still uncomfortable with your request. I just need to understand how all the various positions in your office that you have now are necessary in accomplishing your strategic goals of the city, whereby the position you mentioned, the assistant to the city manager, I still want to call it special projects.
Yeah, it's not special projects.
Right,
so.
but the one you have for your planner. I'm just trying to understand, based on what you were saying for his role, if we could not have hired you could have reached out to a consultant, for instance, and I feel that.
Yeah, and I can certainly go into more detail,
Okay.
and I've explained some of this, but, so most of you know, and you probably recall this from your time as the clerk as well, that the assistant to the city manager position has been in the organization for decades. Faye Gilchrist was an assistant. Aisha Johnson was an assistant to the city manager. Go through a list of folks. Angie at one time was the assistant to the city manager. When we started reducing expenditures going into COVID, this was one of the positions that I pulled out and said, okay, we won't fill it in order to be able to absorb whatever consequences there might be with COVID. Obviously, that came to pass and didn't need it, and so I'm restoring that position. So this position is the one that historically has worked on Youth Services Advisory Board. It's the one that actually does, in this case, the incumbent initially is going to be working on ARPA funds, the record-keeping part of ARPA, which is actually allowing us to use some ARPA dollars to offset some of these costs. But it's really designed to accelerate folks' careers from where they are currently in the organization to somewhere else in the organization. So I'll use Aisha Johnson as an example. She came into the assistant to position as a PIO, actually, out of police, worked for a number of years to gain her skill set to move into economic development, and now she's one of our economic development specialists. So that's the role of this position. That's the role it has been historically, and I'm simply seeking to restore that funding associated with
So
it.
when you had removed that position, you created the position that Angie O'Brien
That is
is
correct.
now in as their chief strategic officer.
That is correct. I created the Chief Strategic Officer, and that's the position right now that's handling Gun Violence Prevention Commission, the EEAB, as well as all of the ARPA grants. All of those items are all being handled by that, in addition to a whole collection of strategic initiatives that we have underway within the organization. This is, and that's why I had to separate those, because that job was significantly more than what the Assistant 2 position is called upon to do. So the Assistant 2 position, he said, is really there to fill in all of those other kind of procedural administrative responsibilities we have. But more importantly, it's designed to help accelerate that individual's career with the city so that they can compete for other positions within the city over time. They're not intended to be in it for an extended period of time. 3 years, 4 years is kind of the norm, and then they'll go on elsewhere in the organization, and then somebody else will fill into that role.
And is that the same as true to be for your assistant to the city manager for apprenticeship?
No, yes, that program, if you remember, the Assistant City Manager Apprentice is a program that was put in place for succession planning. You all remember that when both Brent and Clarence were hired in their Assistant City Manager roles to replace Brian and Sherman, the candidates all came from outside. All of the candidates that were competitive came from outside this organization, and I didn't think that was fair. I didn't think it was appropriate, that we had directors that were unable to compete with folks coming with experience from outside. So this is an effort to basically go through 4 or 5 directors and upper-level managers to prepare and equip them for the time at which Clarence or Brent retire, that they will be then competitive. Ideally, we'll end up with 5 or 6 candidates only from within the city that can compete for those positions and not actually have to turn to someone from the outside. So that's what that's for. But those assignments are only 2-year assignments. So they're temporarily assigned that role, then they rotate back to their original position. And in that 2 years, the person who's backfilling their position is actually getting experience that they wouldn't have otherwise received as well. So it's actually helping at the departmental level as well. And that is a total cost of $10,000 each for those. I mean, that's basically what we pay them, is $10,000 more for assuming that temporary responsibility, and then they rotate back out. And there's 2 of them at a time. That's what it goes through.
And in the meantime, you will be, I think, filling 2 positions in the planning department.
Correct.
Since you have those moving
Correct,
up.
there's two, so if you remember, we installed 2 planner positions when the comprehensive plan came along, but we did it as a one-time temporary kind of role. So basically, they were hired full-time, no benefits for the staff, and we were fortunate to get 2 really good candidates that helped us through the comprehensive plan, one of whom has since joined permanently the planning department, but they've always been funded. This is an effort now to make those permanent positions with benefits, and the purpose is so that they can start working on the neighborhood plans now that the comprehensive plan is finished. So that's what those 2 are. So there's no change in the dollars. It's changing. Well, that's not true. There is a change in the dollars associated with the benefits, but no change in the dollar associated with salaries. But what we were finding is offering someone in this environment a job that we can only guarantee from year to year with no benefits wasn't securing folks, and so this is make that more permanent.
And the only reason I bring it up is because I'm still concerned about the vacant unfunded positions that
Sure.
are still in various departments that are still looking to get money back in their budgets to hire. And that evidently is not being the case, so workers are still, those that are still working, are overworked and unappreciated for their efforts. And more or not, they may be leaving because of that, and no
Yeah, and
one else is coming into the organization.
And I guess I would ask, when you refer to vacant unfunded positions, what positions are you referring to?
I mean, in some of the departments, there are several departments that I've been told that still do not have positions, that they are...
New positions.
New positions or positions that they had to let go of that have still up to date, have not been implemented back in.
Yeah, no one has, we have not had any reduction in forces here in the 5 years I've been here. Now, there may have been folks that were back in 2008 who had positions
And I
reduced
think
with the
that's what they're
recession.
saying, they're still unfunded since you've been in, that they have been wanting to
Yeah.
put money back in,
Sure,
but because of budget
Yeah,
cuts, they have not been able to.
Yeah, I can
do
assure
so.
you that we probably get,
Yeah.
we probably get 100 requests for new positions in the organization. For example, and you did not mention these, there are 2 other positions, or another position that's identified coming out of emergency management, which is a new emergency management position. That came up through Fire EMS because of all of the stress really associated with all the work emergency management's doing under COVID, and really an acknowledgement that we can't actually make that work with just basically one person, really 2 people, that we needed another person in there. So yeah, we get requests all the time for those different positions, and we ultimately worked it. Our bigger issue is actually not new positions. Our bigger issue is actually filling vacant positions that we have right now, which is why we made the recommendation for the 5% compensation increase. That's the bigger issue. And if it's always a balancing act, because if a department receives more people, that's less money to apply to the salaries for the folks that are there. The 5% represents, again, the largest increase we've been able to offer our employees in a decade. So that's an effort to try to get at the folks that are working here and get them more money, and really responds to what they're doing.
And my last question deals with your dues and memberships. I noticed in the council's budget that we have for dues and memberships of, I want to say about $8,000. And part of it is for, which is, I understand, which is the Sister Cities part that we pay of $810. But I noticed that the majority of that comes out of your budget for Sister Cities, and I'm just trying to figure out why it's just in one place. The National Civic League, I understand, was added into council's budget, and instead of being placed into the city managers or another budget, as well as VML, which is in your budget, and the council still pays for the, I want to say, the National League of Cities. How come it's just not under one category,
and it
and
could-
why is it in council's budget?
Yeah, it could be in any of them. I suspect, and I don't know this for a fact, I suspect there's just some legacy that they've hung on those. The Sister City one I can answer real easily, because I think the 2 differences is the Sister City item that's in the budget, city manager's budget, which is actually not my budget, it's actually the external agency budget.
Right, external, yes.
That Sister City one is the one that we pay for a city to be a part, basically our support of sister cities, just like we do for TAP, just like we do for $10 million worth of external agencies are all in there. The $810 that's in the council budget, I suspect is for individual memberships, but I don't know.
No.
Because it's not for that same purpose. So I don't know what the $810 is for.
I'm not sure either, but it's not for the
It's
individual.
the dues of Sister Cities International for the local organization to continue to be connected to Sister Cities International.
And then the city, there is an amount that we give to Sister Cities International. I'm trying to find it. And I want to say it's about $30,000.
Yeah, that's the one
Here it
you're-
is, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, it's 12,000.
Yeah, that's the
That we
total.
give to the Roanoke
That's
Valley
local.
Sister
That's
Cities.
local.
Yes.
810.
And then 810 goes to the Sister Cities International.
But I think,
And I'm
at your
just-
core of your question, there isn't any reason why, if you've got like VML, the Civic League, any of those.
I'm just saying the split, and I'm
Right, they
just
could
trying to
easily,
figure out
yeah,
why.
they could easily certainly be moved
Yeah.
into that same
Yeah.
external agency piece. I don't know why they're not.
Yeah, just
like
as
that.
if the National Civic League was just moved into council's budget. But council may not be aware that there are certain things that are being put in our budget
Right.
without
Right. Well,
consultation with us. It's just
I
being
didn't put
done.
those in your budget, they've been in there. I don't know when
No,
they were
this
added.
one was not. The National Civic League was not. That one was added, which was
Is that-
$2,500.
Was that added when, that might have been added when the mayor was president of the National
No,
Civic?
it just came
Or on
this
the
year.
board?
It's
Is
being
that-
added this year.
Is that accurate? That we added National Civic League?
Yeah.
What is it? All right, so that's for conference attendance, not for, so I want to be clear here.
It's under
because-
dues and memberships.
Yeah.
It's
for
under
and-
dues and membership. If it's conference, then it should be under
But
the
that,
training.
that's different than, see, like, for example, the Sister Cities. Sister Cities is for us to support Sister Cities.
Correct, I understand
That's
that.
different than for you as council members to attend those
Right,
events.
if it was to
That-
attend, it should be
That item
training.
is to attend those events, not
Yeah.
for sponsorship.
It's under dues and membership. It's not under that portion.
So it's just talking about what category it's in. I just want to be clear that it's not, it was not something we added in to support the organization. It was something we added in so that you all could attend the events of that organization or maintain membership in that organization, which does belong in the council budget.
True, if that is the case, yes. I don't doubt that. And I think that's all the questions I have.
And I don't, and I don't form, just so it's clear, I don't actually make the request for the council budget. You do that in concert
Right, but
with your
this was not
clerk.
asked of us. That's where I'm getting at. It was not asked unless I stand corrected by the mayor who was active in the National Civic League, unless he did. I was not approached.
Yeah.
We had to get back. We're running for American City, the Star City again, so we made to get back. Let me ask you, based on Councilmember Moon Reynolds' question, how much money are we talking about, just a rough number total? Are we talking about dollars?
For,
Out of this $3 million budget, we got, how
you
much
talking about
money?
for that item?
Yeah,
That was $2,500.
$2,500.
how much?
$2,500.
$2,500, which is council's membership dues is $11,800 we have, that was put in our budget for the upcoming year to be approved.
And again, that request is submitted by the clerk's office. I don't put those items in there. I take the request that comes from the clerk's office. I assume the clerk has talked with you all in formulating those requests, and then we process those requests.
Well, yeah, she keeps up with that.
But no discussions are being held at this time
Well,
No
we-
discussions
on council's budget.
Yeah, and again,
Okay.
if that's true,
I
it
don't
really
think
is
it-
up to you all,
That's fine.
because.
right. I don't think it's ever, I don't think it's ever been.
I understand, and I'm not saying anything derogatory about that. I was just making a point.
Yeah, I just want
With
to
regards to
make
what I
sure,
noticed.
the only time that discussion is going to take place is among yourselves.
True, no problem.
All I know is I'm not going nowhere. I'm taking no
Yeah.
trips, and so I don't know where it's going, if it's going, I guess, maybe at lunches or what have you, but that's where,
So Mayor and Council,
Mhm.
then, just as kind of closing, if there are no other questions.
well, thank you. I want to make sure that we're clear now on the budget, that there are no issues out here that gives you heartburn, because we coming back Tuesday, or the Monday, the 9th. Is that right, Madam Clerk?
The 9th, yep.
Yeah, to adopt this. All right? Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Cowell.
Excuse me, Mayor, I believe Ms. Sanchez Jones still wants to be recognized.
So,
All right, now, we got to push this a little bit.
okay,
all right?
one last question.
Sure.
Could we, is it possible for us to change the firefighter empty one you said it's now 41, but it's 43,800.
Right.
So that needs to be reflected on this, and then how is that going to reflect across the board?
It doesn't move anything else across the board. It would just reflect those. So in effect, where you see that like 41 number, 42 number, and so on, those would go away, and 43.8, whatever the number is, that's our new entry point, has been since this last recruit class went through. So yes, we could adjust that piece of it so that instead of it being a footnote on what was approved last year, it would show that new 43
Okay,
number.
because it's very misleading right now. So, okay, thank you.
It's not misleading.
Well, it is misleading when I see the writing, when I see that it's 43 for one, and step 2 is 42.5.
Right, the starting pay
Yes.
is 43.8, that's pretty
Okay.
clear. If we need to eliminate, I mean, obviously, we're not gonna start somebody at 43 and then pay them 42 the next year, that's not gonna happen. But yes, we can make that adjustment.
Yes,
so that
thank
it-
you.
So it just starts at that 43 like
Yes.
it shows.
Just so that
Thank
we're
you.
all clear.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, and again, we just did it as a footnote because it was approved last year, but we can certainly change the tables.
Thank you.
That's
May 9 at 7 PM, I have it down as 2 PM.
Is that 2? Oh.
It's 7 on the,
It should be 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's a 2 o'clock meeting.
Yeah, it's been,
It's 2 o'clock.
well, I mean, yeah, but
been
that's,
announced in the past on our schedules as 2 o'clock.
But it's 2 o'clock.
Yeah, 2 o'clock. Yeah.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All right,
Ms.
thank
Bethany.
you all.
You got it.
Down here at 2 o'clock by myself.
No, you be here with us. I don't know where they'll be, but we'll be here.
All right, council will be in recess until our 2 o'clock meeting. We'll go into closed session now. And I ask the colleagues to remember, we're going into closed session, and it's about 12 o'clock now, nearly.